hour. As people are scrambling for their seats, let me welcome you all to our fall meeting of the FCC Technological Advisory Council. If you thought you were at another meeting, this would be your time to exit, as they say in the airplanes. Today we have quite a number, I'm told, of people on the phone, so doing this in a bit reverse order. We do have the phones on, Michael?
Conference bridge?
But maybe we could have those on the phone introduce yourselves to the group.
This is Brian Font with the National Emergency Number Association.
Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
And Kevin Sparks from Nokia.
Welcome. Are there others on the phone? I was expecting 3 or 4 more. Well, maybe they're late in joining. In any event, welcome to you, and we will make a quick trip around the room and have each of you introduce yourselves quickly. Starting with Michael, as you may have noted, Walter has become much more handsome this time around. Walter's actually enjoying his vacation in France, getting away from the violence in the U.S., going to France. And probably shouldn't even joke about such matters as that, but in any event, Michael, introduce yourself as the alternate designated federal.
Yes, I'm playing Walter Johnson today. Michael Huff from Office of Engineering and Technology.
Nomi Bergman with Advance. Advance is the parent company to what was Bright House Networks.
Charlie Zhang from Samsung Research America. We are based out of the Dallas, Texas. It's my first meeting here. Nice to meet you all.
So please do extend a special welcome to Charlie. We're really delighted to have you here. He's effectively been a part of us for a little while now, but he's been in absentia for a few months through other matters. So,
David Young with Verizon.
Stephen Hayes with Ericsson.
Lisa Guest, Juniper Networks.
Jack Michalski from Qualcomm.
Mark Bales from
Visual Link.
Brian Daly, AT&T.
John Barnhill with GenBand.
Russell Jurek, Cisco.
Adam Drobot, Open TechWorks.
Lynn Claudy, National Association of Broadcasters.
Greg Lappin, ARRL.
Steve Lanning, Viasat.
Paul Steinberg with Motorola.
Mark Richer, the Advanced Television Systems Committee.
Lynn Merrill, representing the NTCA.
Gavin Priest, University of Colorado, here as a special government employee.
Jeff Forster with Intel. Teresa Hennessy, Comcast.
David Tenenhouse, VMware.
Marvin Serbu, Carnegie Mellon, but serving as special government employee.
Rangan from Excel Communications.
Marty Cooper, Data LLC.
Dale Hatfield, Silicon Flatiron Center at the University of Colorado.
Julie Knapp, FCC Office of Engineering and Technology.
And for those that haven't already figured it out, I'm Dennis Roberson, and at Illinois Institute of Technology and Wireless Network and Communications Research Center, as it says on the card. But delighted to have you all here. Progress continues unabated, having previewed all of the presentations that we have before us. As usual, even with the extra half an hour that we've added to the schedule, this will be a very busy time. So we'll look forward to hearing all of the reports, and as always, a focus on the actionable recommendations that we're moving towards. Those usually culminate at the December meeting, but feel free to advance your actionable recommendations now. There were some conversations about that this morning Dale's chomping at the bit for his actionable recommendation. We do have a really exciting agenda, as we have had through this year in particular. So let me quickly step out of the way of the presentations, but I'll give one last opportunity for those who haven't introduced themselves on the bridge. Are there others that would like to introduce themselves? Put up the agenda. I guess we don't have any others on. And if we could have the agenda on the screen, please. So we have just accomplished the introductions, and we'll hold forth with mobile device theft prevention, the good work that's been going on there, on to cybersecurity, the new working group for the year, the focus on our drones and CubeSats and the like, which is very, very timely, future game-changing technologies, and with a focus on 5G. Welcome, Shahid. Next generation internet, and then the spectrum and receiver performance working group. The first 4 will be 40-minute sessions, and the final 2 will be 15-minute sessions, as we've broken things into the long and the short format, with long format for all coming up in the December meeting. And with that, let me turn things over to Brian Daly to talk about our continuing progress in the mobile device theft prevention.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and if we could have the slides, please. We'll jump right into the presentation. So this is the long-form update of the work we've been doing this year with mobile device theft prevention. Just to review the charter of the working group, again, we're continuing with the work we've done over the past 2 years, and for this year focusing on next-generation anti-theft features, and more important, an assessment that the effect of the previous recommendations are having on device theft, and I'll jump more into that as we go through the presentation. We also are looking at consumer outreach efforts, ways to assist law enforcement in IMEI, obtaining IMEI information off mobile devices, and also examining the methods for carriers to provide more useful data related to device theft. We have a number of participants, as you can see, from a variety of different stakeholders in the mobile theft ecosystem. I must say we've got, a good participation on all our calls, and, we have a good representation from throughout the industry. The working group priorities we set forth for this year. First, we wanted to set up a common framework for collection of centralized data post the July 2015 commitments. If you may recall, working with CTIA, the OS providers, mobile operators, law enforcement agencies, we came up with a framework for a voluntary commitment that was implemented in July of 2015, which included mobile theft prevention techniques that were incorporated into mobile devices that were sold post-July 2015. We are looking to gain data on how effective those solutions have been, and through that, CTIA has completed a Nielsen survey of consumers. We had preliminary results presented to the working group, and we're expecting, further results probably within the next month or so. There's also an operator survey currently underway to look at information from the operators on how their data with regard to mobile device theft has changed post-July 2015. We also are doing continued studies, to see whether those implementations post-July 2015 have the desired effect on mobile device theft. We're collecting data both from CTIA, and we're attempting to get law enforcement to provide us with data so that we can perform an analysis. The law enforcement, we're working closely with Department of Justice and going to work with the police chiefs to see what kind of information we can glean from the data they can provide us. There are also mechanisms that have been developed within ADIS and the GSM Association on enabling a mechanism for the IMEIs to be retrieved on disabled devices. We need to track the implementation of those IMEI retrieval mechanisms and also do consumer outreach both to law enforcement and to consumers on using those mechanisms. The best practices are in place and the educational outreach needs to be delayed until the devices are available, aligning with those best practices. And then finally, we're looking at a study on how to expand blacklisting to all U.S. carriers, working with the GSM Association and its North American Regional Interest Group, as well as CTIA. Right now, we've got, I think, 4 or 5 carriers in the U.S. that are participating in the blacklist, but we need to expand that to see if we can get more carriers engaged. One of the items we undertook this year was to do a status review of the 2014 and 2015 recommendations. And what we wanted to do was develop a cross-reference of the industry activity related to those recommendations with the goal to make sure that action is underway for all recommendations. We did identify gaps to address, and those are specifically listed here. The solution providers and the ecosystem involved in reverse logistics. We need to make sure that those solution providers have enacted a mechanism for reverse logistic providers. We also need to perform ongoing studies for potential new measurable risks to public safety that requires future assessment and consideration by industry. Perform ongoing study and monitoring of the dynamic and changing threat environment, investigating into whether the increased availability of the anti-theft functionality on new devices have any effect on increasing consumer use of these features, and also examine if anti-theft solutions may be able to provide consumers with a feature to determine the enrollment status of their solution in such a way that the consumer does not have to be in physical possession of the device. And finally, ADIS, working with other key stakeholders such as the GSM Association to identify key technological areas where the FCC should seek further information from industry on such topics as IMEI requirements and use of databases and future theft prevention opportunities. Now, these gaps are ones that we noted do not have or any identified industry activity, and we'll target the recommendations for December to make sure that we do have all of these covered. This is just a sampling of the cross-reference of the industry mobile device theft prevention activity to the recommendations that we had both in 2014 and 2015. And again, the goal was to identify that there were actual actions that have been undertaken within the industry in order to meet those recommendations or the spirit of those recommendations, and then identify the gaps of areas that have not been covered. And this is the completion of the table 2014 and 2015 recommendations. There's a number of industry mobile device theft prevention related activities underway. ADIS has completed a best practices document for obtaining mobile device identifiers for mobile device theft prevention. This is, again, the important one for law enforcement so that if they recover a device, they'll be able to identify, get the identity of that device, even if that device is in a locked state. CTIA is in the process of implementing the Mobile Device Information Portal, and that's envisioned to be available by the end of 2016 for Phase 1 set of requirements, with the Phase 2 set of requirements for implementation in 2017. The Phase 1 set of requirements will have the capability to do device lookup of IMEI to determine the blacklist status and support consumers, law enforcement, as well as commercial entities. The CTIA also has a stolen phones working group established. They're the group that developed the anti-theft voluntary commitment, the implementation of the mobile device information portal, and also the point of coordination with both the GSM Association and its North American Regional Interest Group regarding industry best practices and outreach to law enforcement and other relevant industry stakeholders. There are a number of surveys that CTIA has undertaken or is underway. First, the annual survey of consumers to solicit information regarding the adoption of anti-theft security tools on smartphones, as well as a survey of carriers, which will be complete in the fourth quarter, to solicit feedback concerning the number of smartphones reported lost or stolen, as well as the number of potential duplicate IMEI or MEID identifiers that may be present. There's also a number of activities in the GSM Association related to mobile device theft prevention. We already discussed the IMEI retrieval on disabled and locked devices. This was originally developed within the ADIS, but the GSM Association's Device Security Group, recognizing the need to resolve the problem, has also adopted the ADIS best practices as a GSM Association best practice. The GSM Association is also looking at information reporting, providing quarterly reports listing mobile carriers in countries that are connected to their IMEI database and the degree which the IMEI data related to devices reported lost or stolen between connected carriers. The GSM Association is also involved in carrier recruitment. I'll show a couple of slides down the number of carriers across the globe that are involved in using the IMEI database to blacklist stolen devices. The GSM Association has undertaken an extensive campaign to recruit more carriers to participate both in data sharing initiatives as well as device blocking, especially here in the U.S. And finally, they continue to provide the IMEI lookup service directly to device traders, law enforcement agencies, and regulators, as well as consumers for stolen devices. There's a number of other best practices that have been developed. They have developed a device blocking and data sharing recommended best practice. This was developed in the North American Regional Interest Group in order to have some consistency with the U.S. carriers in blacklisting and blocking of lost and stolen mobile devices on the network, as well as sharing the data across carriers through the IMEI database. There's also a number of IMEI integrity initiatives underway, making sure that the initiatives that have been in place within the GSM Association are up to date to make sure that implementation of IMEIs in devices is trusted, and they're committed to working with device manufacturers to make sure IMEI security remains an important enabler to combat device theft. The Device Security Group under the GSM Association is also reviewing the IMEI security technical design principles and also to bring them up to date to make sure that the latest information on IMEI implementation and IMEI security is captured within those documents, and also looking at the IMEI security weakness reporting and correction process, which is a formal process the GSM Association has to centralize the reporting of new identified IMEI security weaknesses due to affected device manufacturers, and put in place methods to resolve those issues. And then finally, there's a number of anti-theft device feature requirements that have been developed in the GSMA. These are a set of requirements that can be used by device manufacturers, mobile network operators, third-party service providers to offer features to device owners to assist in locating stolen devices. and also to protect the data within the device. These are requirements for on-device solutions that we have adopted here in the U.S. This is more requirements for implementation on a global scale. I mentioned earlier that the GSM Association produces a stolen device data sharing report. This is a report that talks about, describes the network operators that are participating in the exchange of IMEI data concerning devices reported lost or stolen. This data comes from the GSMA IMEI database, relates to operators with active live or test user accounts. The GSMA IMEI database maintains a global blacklist collated from the data provided by contributing operators, and this data is available 24/7 to the operators that have established connection with the database. One of the interesting statistics we can get out of this is looking at what operators currently participate in lost or stolen blacklisting on a global scale. And as you can see from this figure, I guess it's more pinkish color, is at least one operator in the country is participating. The purple color is at least one operator is testing, and the grayish color are areas where no operators in that country are currently participating in blacklisting. This next graphic shows the lost or stolen data sharing between operators, both on a global scale, an international scale, and a national scale. And as you can see, the Americas are pretty well covered, as we reported last time, with most of the operators here in the U.S. Sharing at least internationally. But there are, significant regions within the world that don't have any sharing of data going on whatsoever. So what we can glean for this and take away is that there are many countries currently not participating in the lost and stolen blacklisting or sharing of the data, especially Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And we find Australia also uses a national solution and not currently sharing that data with the rest of the world. So one of the draft recommendations we've been discussing is recommending that the FCC work with the State Department to encourage further global participation in lost and stolen blacklisting and lost and stolen data sharing. So that's a recommendation draft that will work further and finalize it for the December meeting. The GSM Association is also looking at a lost stolen device trafficking patterns project, and one of the topics is that keeps coming up is where are these stolen devices ending up when they're stolen. We currently don't have good information on where they are going and what trafficking patterns can be detected. So the GSM Association is initiating a study to determine what levels of lost or stolen devices are being blocked on networks and where these devices are showing up and being detected. They're calling for volunteers to participate in gathering this information to determine what we can learn to establish how many stolen devices stay in country versus leave. Do stolen devices migrate to non-blocking networks, and to what degree? And when stolen devices are presented to a network, which networks did they come from? This information obviously can be useful to the work of the Mobile Device Theft Prevention Working Group and also to the carriers. And this is going to require effort on participating carriers in gathering data. And since it's sensitive data, the GSM Association is going to respect confidentiality requirements. Some breaking news coming out of Chicago about a couple of weeks ago or last week. We're finding that the impacts of some of the mobile device theft prevention initiatives that are being put in place are actually making it to the streets, in that the criminals are becoming smarter and forcing victims to unlock their phones and reset the settings to factory status as they perpetrate their crimes. So this is going to require further analysis by the working group to determine, if this is a result of some of the solutions that are being put in place, and if there's any countermeasures that can be recommended as a result. And also out of London, we're seeing anecdotal reports that while there is a downward pressure on the volume of phone crime, the nature of the serious threats have the thieves have gotten wise to disable the solutions, such as Finding My iPhone. So these reports and anecdotal reports are going to need further analysis by the Mobile Device Theft Prevention Working Group, and we expect to do that between now and December, and we'll see if any recommendations come out as a result of these. So the next steps, provide recommendations from the 2014 and 2015 reports to close any remaining gaps toward completing the actions that were specified in those reports. We want to analyze the consequences of the solutions, initiate the stolen device data trafficking patterns project, and continue discussions with police chiefs to provide them information on the portal that's being developed, and also see if we can get statistics on how the effectiveness of the theft prevention measures implemented to date are having on mobile device theft within their jurisdictions. And again, our key deliverable will provide the final recommendations and industry updates for the 2016 work items in December, and I anticipate we'll have further work items that'll go into 2017. So that concludes the presentation.
As always, an excellent report, Brian, and lots of progress. At the same time, some of the issues are the same disturbing issues that we've had from the start, particularly the fact that we still don't know where the phones are going, and a lot of the places that they might be going, we don't have any radar screen to be able to detect them as your maps displayed, so it's a challenge. I'm not seeing any tent cards coming up for those of you who are not totally familiar. Put the tent card up if you have something to share, and Michael immediately did so.
Sure. Brian, on your slide number 13 and 14, looking at the maps, you might have mentioned this on the previous meeting, but what are the hesitance from some of these operators, especially in Europe and Asia, not really participating in this program or running one of their own programs to report these stolen phones?
That's actually going to be part of this data trafficking patterns project. The GSM Association wants to try to determine from those operators what actually are the barriers to putting solutions in place. There's two aspects of mobile device theft prevention that carriers implement. One is the uploading of stolen device data to the IMEI database, but the other is actually blocking devices on their network, which requires something like an equipment identity register to be implemented within their networks so that they can do checks against the IMEIs and block those devices if they show up on a blacklist. So that's really one of the key things we're going to try to collect further data on, and hopefully have some understanding of that by the December meeting.
Thank you.
Any questions from those of you on the phone?
No, we're good.
Okay, back in the room then, Mark?
Okay. Yeah, have you gotten the information or have you looked at theft as far as not just for the phones to be resold, but the phones being taken for parts? Because we see the kiosks that are in all the malls, like the EOSA kiosks, where you can take your cell phones, go into the mall, bring it in, they take the type of phone, then they instantaneously give you a bid as to how much you want for it, and then they openly sell it on the internet. They don't buy it from you. They then put it out for bid on the internet, and then whoever bids back on it, then that's what you get the value for the phone on. So it's sort of like these intermediate pawn shop type thing. I was wondering if you know if there's any type of, that you're working on any type of prevention, or what percentage of phones might be stolen that aren't being reassigned to networks but are being sold off for parts services.
Well, first on the prevention, the mobile device information portal will provide the capability so that devices that are bought for resale, such as that, can be checked against the IMEI database to make sure that they are legitimate devices and not stolen devices, reported stolen devices. So the long-term vision is that, there'll be prevention measures once the portal is up and running and those vendors make use of the data from the portals. As far as where the devices are ending up, that's as Dennis mentioned, that's the big question still, whether they end up going to other countries whole, intact, or whether they're being used for parts. It's still a big unknown.
Okay, Julie.
Brian, thanks for the great report and the great work of all the group. What kind of metrics do you expect we can see in December? I mean, that would show progress. Realistically, I know this is a big problem, but at a very high level, we'll be able to show how many phones were stolen and.
Yeah, I think it was 2 years ago, we got initial statistics from law enforcement on number of devices that were stolen in their jurisdictions. What we're hoping to do by December is have an update to that to show what the current statistics are, do a comparison against those original statistics, and see what the trends are.
All right, I don't see any other questions or comments coming up, so well done, and let's move on to cybersecurity. I've been giving Michael a hard time in his role with Walter. We've gotten to this mode of having things completely lined up one by one, so we've altered that, but I think we may well survive with moving it down.
Us, right?
Pardon?
It's an IQ test for us, right?
Yes,
we
exactly.
can actually handle this. Maybe challenging.
So, Paul, please take it away on cybersecurity.
So I'll speak on behalf of several of my colleagues here that have been working in this area. Shahid to my right, and then Mike Bergman, and Mitt behind me will jump in if we get into the weeds. So we'll see how this goes. So if we go to the next slide, we have 3 sub-working groups within cyber that have been commissioned by the FCC. One is around 5G security, which was really renamed from last year's work, which was really around the IoT security work that we'd done then, and a lot of progress there to report on. There's a piece on cybersecurity around software configurable radios. That was a new item that showed up about mid-year from the FCC, and Mike's jumped in and done a really great job, getting a lot of traction around that. So I think we're on track for a good result at the end of the year. And then securing software-defined networks, also some carryover from last year that Mike and Ken have been leading. So let's jump into the first one, which is the 5G group. Here you see the active members. Tom McGarry couldn't be here. He would be probably leading this discussion today. And then, as I mentioned, Amit is his co-chair. And then you see great participation from all. And a couple of folks have been really providing really, really important bridges for some of their asks from the FCC, and I'll talk about that as I get into the discussion a little further. So the proposed, I don't know why we call this proposed, because it is the scope and direction. And effectively, if you run down the list, it was to start with the work from last year, then basically work on some recommendations, requirements, whatever word you want to call it, and that turns out to be important, and I'll get into that too, around IoT and how we can get in front of the work for the definition of 5G. And I think some of this piggybacks off on the millimeter wave conference you guys had earlier this year. I think, Julie, you hosted that. So these kind of dovetail together. But to try to get in front of the standardization process with some cyber concepts, given that 5G has so much difference in terms of breadth and scope. Work through that, build the recommendations, and then the FCC asked us, well, great, now we have the recommendations. What's the best way to actually get them to, put into play with good effect? So we basically have all of that in place. Now we just have to do the last step, and that's where we're going to need some approval from the TAC. So where we sit right now is at the September date, we've completed, the team has completed a list of recommendations around 4 key areas, and we're going to be looking for approval from the TAC for that recommendation document to be publishable so we can take the last step. And so jumping into that, the TAFER that was produced was really created 17 recommendations around the 4 areas that you see here: denial of service, key management, identity management, and mechanisms for isolation, all of which we felt had an interesting pull and a sort of a divergence of use cases in 5G that would actually pull these in a different direction than what traditionally the mobile networks had done. The paper was completed, was distributed last week, and hopefully everybody had enough time to go through it. What we'd be looking for today is approval of that paper from the TAC so that we can basically use it outside of the TAC to follow through with execution of one of the other requests, which was how best to promote these recommendations to good effect and where. And so this is one of the places where Brian had a great suggestion. Why don't we try to leverage ATIS? And he mentioned some work that ATIS had done in the the mobile device theft prevention work. We're going to try to run the same play here and see if we can work with them on this paper and use them to inject it into the primary area that we've assessed, which is 3GPP, where we'd have the greatest effect. So what we would hope to do between now and the end of the year is effectively take the paper, work with ATIS, get that into play. There will be some remachining required of it, we would anticipate, as they bring their expertise to bear, and then hopefully get that launched on its way, primarily targeted at 3GPP. The other request at the bottom was what other SDOs might we think about. I mean, I think everyone would think of 3GPP as an SDO for anything with a G after it. But the other ones that actually surfaced, there were a plethora of them out there that dabbled in IoT or wireless standards, but really our assessment is it's 3GPP, ATIS, ITU, and IEEE. And so the work path here is, if we're successful with ATIS, will get us essentially 2 of those boxes checked together. And then ITU and IEEE will have to think about, is there more to be done there in terms of promoting the standards. In parallel, in case for some reason this doesn't work out with ATIS, for whatever reason we don't know, we'll look at an optional alternative plan for how would we promote these recommendations if that path doesn't succeed. Yep. Hey, Dave.
Question on that.
You bet.
Do you think that constellation of SDOs would sufficiently represent the positions of applications and OS?
Yeah, that's where the constellation goes into a galaxy. Gets significantly more complicated. So first step we thought was those were clearly the more leveraged points. So that was the tack that we took, and we think that that 5G will be the fundamental aspect of what's there. We had pretty good representation, Admiral, across industry from what we could glean. We think it's a very good first start. Will there be more required, and does each have its own specific nuances to consider? Almost certainly.
Thank you.
But yeah, there's a huge multiplier effect beyond those 4 that changes the game considerably, we thought. It was really helpful. One of the other questions that our liaisons, Jeff and Ahmed, had asked, which I think they've been terrific along the way and involved very regularly, are we duplicative in any way? Are these guys already thinking about some of these things? And the answer is they could be, and that's part of where the work with ATIS will help us. We tried to keep a relatively clean sheet of paper. Martin Dolly's help from the AT&T was really, really instructive because he's very involved in 3GPP standards, so he kind of helped us toe that line. So we'll have to work through a little bit of that as well when we get into it with ATIS.
Great. And then if we look at the work being done by GSMA around eSIMs,
yep.
It's an example to me of where we need to think early around things like portability.
Yep.
And where there should be a third-party entity that doesn't exist today, that needs to be discussed and formulated at some point to make sure we're not leaving to the end game, we need to balance portability with security, with privacy.
No, it's true. And I think one of the tricks when you talk about IoT, the device capabilities are so diverse compared to what a mobile device of the past has been. And if you look into the recommendations, you'll see that anywhere from the encryption mechanisms, key approaches, and the SIM gets very, very involved in that as well. So yeah, absolutely, there may need to be other groups that industry convenes to get there. I agree.
Thanks.
So I think that's...
Quick question.
Yeah.
Which study groups in the ITU are the relevant ones here?
No, that's a good question. I don't know. Do you happen to know off the top of your head on that? Yeah, we don't have it off the top of our head. I'm sorry. We'll publish that with the final recommendations and report, I guess.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. Or drop me a note on the side if you'd like, and we can get that to you as well.
Yeah, particularly for those on the phone, if you could identify yourselves just so that everyone knows who's speaking, that would be helpful. And
Okay,
and
sorry,
maybe in
Dan,
the
it was
room, I would
different.
appreciate that as well.
That was it.
Sorry.
So I think that's kind of where we are with that. The interesting thing is I thought about what's the actionable recommendation. If we're successful, there isn't one. If they're successful, we've produced the report. We did toy with we used the word recommendation in there. I should have touched on that. We toyed with requirement, the shall, kind of language. Russ steered us clear of that, and he was dead on that we don't really have a requirements levying authority on 3GPP. So we went with recommend. Just to make sure that the terminology was consistent. But if we're successful, we will have provided their recommendations and promoted them. So hopefully, maybe the FCC, other than supporting that and being involved in that process, doesn't have to do anything more than that, which I think was the goal to begin with.
Such a thing that 3GPP stay engaged with us, stay engaged with the TAC, and with our CISRIC, and have a fulsome exchange of information as standards begin to bubble up, take shape, and get refined, so that we're leveraging the work of all and not duplicating where we can avoid duplication, but ensuring that we're getting a full input across the ecosystem on what's arrived at. And we see the role of the FCC as being one that facilitates the transparency of the discussions that the SDOs and that the really smart people in the TAC and the smart people in the CISRIC are engaged in, and not to ourselves define what the results should be, but to amplify that transparency so that we're truly bringing in all the elements of the ecosystem that should be a part of designing security for the future of 5G.
That's great. So just thanks again to Ahmed and Tom for leading this, and I guess all we really need now is approval of the TAC to take the paper outside and to work with Addis on it.
So would you like to proceed with that at this moment then?
Yes, I'm ready for that,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
And hopefully you've all had a chance, well, you certainly have all had a chance. Paul did send out the in a memorandum form with the attachment, the document that he's talking about. So are there any questions for Paul about the document or about the intention? Seeing none, are you prepared to vote on moving forward with this document then? If I could, all in favor of moving forward to move this to a published document within the context of the TAC website, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Let it be noted that it is unanimous and you should proceed forward. And Michael, we need to get the document posted then as an approved document for the TAC. So very good.
Thank you.
Always good to have an accomplishment that you can put the check behind. So good work.
Absolutely. Thanks to the team on that. They did a great job. So the next two work groups will just provide a brief report on where we are, because those are still progressing toward the end game. So if we could, thank you. So I'm going to skip the summary of the recommendations that were in the slide deck in case we needed to get into that. So the next group, again, Mike is leading that from CTA, and he's been doing a fantastic job, trying to get our head around this. And it's a very interesting problem. I mean, the basic problem that the FCC posed was sort of this intersection between cybersecurity and software-defined radios. And so whenever you put anything into the software domain, it's, in danger of being hacked or, maliciously used. And the questions were really, one, usability of software-defined radio technology and applicability of that, but still obviously making sure that it complies with regulations. So the request was, is there something we can recommend, and that's actually on the next slide. The request was, is there something we can recommend here that would actually try to alleviate some of the tension here and still not, and maybe lessen any stifling of innovation that may be going on here. And then, of course, balancing the equation that these devices are becoming much, much cheaper, much more accessible to many more factions. So balancing the complexity and the cost for that across the board. So as I said, Mike's done a really good job, and it kind of started, we got some additional feedback from the FCC around the current rules and the checklist approach that they have, and they've already noted that the checklist approach is somewhat problematic for reasons I just noted. Gave us some pretty good background on that, and what we're really finding is very rarely do manufacturers use this option, so that's kind of a sign. And yet we still wind up with interference and problems even with where we stand. And of course, we all know from a technical point of view, this is just going to get much more pervasive and prolific, so it's good that the FCC is thinking about this in advance. So the question was, can we identify a technical fix or some way to improve these results? And that's kind of the path the group is going down now. So we started, with the idea, let's develop the background information. So what are the parameters, what aspects of a radio and the controls that are in it does one need to be worried about? And then what are the common methods of protection that are involved? And there's some key issues that, we identified with just that. And one of the key issues is that the device isn't static and you don't always know where it's at, and the rules apply differently depending upon physically where it is. So that's one of the tricks that we have to kind of work through. So went through the existing checklist, kind of assessed what does work, what doesn't work, and as I said before, what does industry do, and not a lot, to be honest with you. So we're trying to go down the path of the technical fix because checklist is kind of honor system, and obviously that's kind of fraught with peril as well. So the real trick that we're seeing, as I mentioned before, is one of the challenges with a technical fix is how do you know where the device is actually at? So the next slide is what Mike and team have kind of elaborated upon in terms of what are some of the classes of RF parameters that are interesting. So obviously the operating frequencies, both the band of the center band as well as the bandwidth around that, transmission power that's output, what are the modulation types that are allowed in that particular band, and the max that are allowed in that particular band. Smart antenna is another interesting dimension that kind of came into the fray. That's something that one can screw around with and cause problems if it's not appropriately used. And then finally, as you move up on the food chain now with increased use of spectrum sharing, malicious use of spectrum sharing algorithms and decision processes in there could cause havoc as well. So those are some of the classes of parameters that the team has identified as these are some areas of interest that we need to think about. And the next chart kind of gets into, what are some of the configuration controls that could be applied, whether it's a master client kind of thing, module controls, operational modes, the antenna configuration. So if you think about the radio, so how is the radio actually manipulated, managed, and controlled? And I think I see kind of two different classes of devices here. There's a class of device that I'll call it in a managed world. The most obvious one of those is a carrier network. Then there's a consumer device, which I would call completely unmanaged. And so a lot of these operational controls, don't implicitly exist in that environment. So that's kind of the trick and the spread of the challenge. So where we kind of are on this now, or where the team is at now, is they've been meeting pretty regularly. Like I mentioned, they got started in June, developed kind of some of the background information that I went through, I reviewed the checklist, concluded there's other options, and then really right now what they're contemplating and working through after kind of producing what I'll call a reference radio architecture along with the controls in it is, what are the technical fix challenges and what might we recommend here? So that's kind of what you'll expect to see in December. And Mike, is there anything I missed?
No, thanks. That's a great summary.
Okay, great. So I'll stop with that. That's the report of that working group. So hopefully we're on the right track. FCC. Questions on that?
Any questions in this segment, since we're working this in segments, please?
It does seem that devices knowing where they are in what region will be increasingly important, not just domestically, but devices that you tend to use internationally as well. And that with many more channels now a part of the 5G reality, that today when we think of one profile at any given time for software-defined radio, that we would potentially be headed into an environment where we would need multiple profiles active and a device absolutely needing to be aware of where it is to know which of those active profiles are authorized in a given area. I think having the group think through both the authentication aspects of that, the strength of do you really know where you're at before you operate a profile, and then similar to the discussion in 5G around portability and security and privacy, is there a need for a construct like an NPAC or something like that that would ensure that there's a referee as devices with multiple software-defined profiles go in and out of regions and have relationships with providers transition as they go into and out of different parts of the 5G reality.
Yeah. So 5G is one. I guess we're taking it to broader mandate than just 5G here. Is that what we're trying to...
Yeah, I use 5G as an example. I think the same would exist in LMR as we try to get more out of the available spectrum in non-5G areas as well. That opportunity, that upside from devices being aware of where they're at and being able to tailor profiles that set the parameters of the radio in granular areas will allow us to pack, much more use in non-5G areas as well.
Definitely. So the advice there is to consider if there's another group that should, I think the word you used was referee, some of the what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, is there a need to have, if knowing where you're at is important, and if knowing what profiles at any given time to present to the radio depends on knowing where you're at, and radios are going to go into and out of multiple license environments, then is that something that self-discovery is good enough, or is there going to need to be an entity or entities that ensure that spotting early on a device that is not behaving appropriately can result in a correct de-authentication or powering down that device so that it's not creating havoc with a very densely packed dynamic spectrum environment.
So I think devices that are part of a system, if you will, I think those are much more tractable in my mind, because you can do the kinds of things you're talking about. You can actually provide location from the system itself. Those sorts of things are possible. It's the chaotic devices that self-organize that are kind of on the edge. Those are the ones that are really, really challenging. Where there is no Uber authority, if you will, that they have to connect to authenticate, or where they could get their location. So, depending upon how to try to solve the problem holistically, that's the one I think we're kind of stuck on.
Yeah, and the automobile industry is working this now in 5.9 in a very interesting way, where they're not employing encryption, but they're using very strong authentication and rapidly changing that authentication to very purpose built for that function.
Right. Good news is hopefully the car knows where it is. That one I think hopefully works.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Yeah, here. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, grab that one. That's better.
Hi, Mike Bergman from CTA. One other element I think that maybe you sort of hinted at is there may not be a one-size-fits-all solution in this context. There may be spectrum that is adjacent to some densely packed, valuable, managed real estate type of spectrum, and we're going to possibly need a different characteristic to the geolocation, authentication, authorization type of parameters in there. And then we may be able to identify, for example, some spectrum that can be a little bit more cost-effectively managed for how did you characterize it, Paul? Not unmanaged, but and not Wild Wild West, but something that's not quite as tightly locked down. So there may be multiple recommendations or multiple ways to carve this pie.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I do think there'd be a range of management constructs, and outlining those is not necessarily just being, the one, but usable management constructs that we can begin to organize the right controls around, while giving product developers, real options in how they deploy.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. That's a great comment. Thank you. Other questions on this?
Any other questions on the phone? Any questions for Paul on this segment?
No question.
Yes, please identify yourself.
No, I don't have a question. I'm sorry, Dennis.
I thought you said you did have a question. Okay, very good. Let's move on to your third section then.
Okay, great. The slides back, please. Thank you very much. So the third group is really around the software-defined networking, network function virtualization work, and Ken Countway from Comcast and Mike Geller from Cisco have been leading that work with help from a cast of other folks as well. And here I think the report is that we're basically still on track. Just a reminder, the original direction was at 100,000 feet. So we've now put networking in the software domain, so it's hackable in terms of how it's defined and how it behaves. So basically the idea was to build on last year's work, which was a recommendation of best common practices to basically produce those. And then also to provide some recommendations about how more can be produced in industry and how those can be maintained and evolved. So the proposed scope and direction was, we've been spending a lot of time with industry. It's been an interesting kind of journey I think the team's been on in terms of the number and diversity of folks that they've talked to, all the way from open source community to network equipment providers and other folks that actually provide functions. And so we're kind of about where we expected to be. So we're hoping to be right in the process now of drafting the best common practices, and I'll talk about the areas of interest or where we focused initially based upon the team's prioritization of those, and then hope to have the BCPs finalized and a recommendation by December for how the FCC can take those and use those to good effect. So the BCPs, as I mentioned before, several companies were spoken with. Kudos to David and VMware. They've jumped in and helped a great deal with the work here and brought a lot of expertise to bear, and that's kind of helped us along quite a bit as well. And so, as I said before, that work has started. And the areas of focus initially are around sort of the service provider software-defined WAN. And so that's, secure endpoint enrollment, the management of the keys from a cryptographic point of view, identity management, identifying, good actors and bad actors, and then finally the ongoing endpoint trust. So that's a very common use case that is increasingly defined in software and less so in hardware. So that was one the group felt would give us a lot of mileage and would be morphable into other areas. And then, of course, the other was a sort of a spin around, which was how can we use SDN to good effect, and how can we use it to maybe mitigate or deal with DDoS attacks in a different way. So thinking about another best common practice, but not necessarily just thinking that it's the most vulnerable way, but maybe there's some actual upside given that we can algorithmically change its behavior maybe more dynamically. So those were the two bookends the group settled upon. And then where we kind of are at, as I already alluded to, is BCP drafting in progress now, and then what we hope to have by December is two things: those BCPs completed, and a recommendation for how to manage them from a life cycle point of view, both those as well as the creation of others. So I'll stop there if there's any questions.
Very good. Questions around the room? This is a critical area even to wrap your head around, as all of the functionality is. We've talked with the last year's Future Technologies Group, Game Changer Technologies, this move to software-defined networks and network function virtualization is a great boon at one end. At the other end, it creates a lot of exposure, security being a large one. Any questions or comments about the presentation that Paul's provided? Anything on the phone? Which is remarkable. We're actually having a full presentation with no comments. This is unusual.
Well, it's 1/3 of a presentation, so that's
One-
pretty good.
1/3.
I'm kind of atoning for some past sins, maybe. I'd just like to close with, thanks to Tom and Amit, Mike, and then, of course, Ken and Mike Geller from Cisco. They've been doing a great job, and then great counsel from Amit Jeff and the Admiral from the FCC has really helped us, tighten the loop up here. So thanks to everybody involved.
Very good. Continuing on, let's move to our newest working group, the implications of mass deployment of aeronautical and space transmitters, better known as the drone and SatCube team. So Steve, take it away. I think, I'm not sure whether your partner has joined on the line or not.
No, I'm afraid that I'm here alone.
Okay. Please
So-
take it away, Steve Lanning.
Okay, thank you very much. So the working group has been very active and with a lot of discussion from a wide range of people with inputs. And the challenge, of course, has been to trade off widely varying opinions and to try to get to something resembling a document that everybody could stand behind. We've had great participation from industry contributors, and I would say that as much as 50% or more of the work has been done by the contributors, so that strongly speaks for just how engaged the industry is in our working group. So in terms of our activities, we have been talking about high-altitude platforms, HAPS, and would note that Facebook and Google have been conducting experiments, and Facebook demonstrated its first HAPS flight. It's available online, and I think it's really cool. But that
was a technical commentary, really cool.
I showed the picture last time. But it also the HAPS are still really in a very experimental stage, and so the working group is basically recommending that the individual companies continue to come to the FCC and push their own opinions and feelings and positions on that. Whoops. So we've also been looking at LEO-based satellite service. So we were briefed by OneWeb and Boeing on their plans to deploy hundreds or even thousands of LEO satellites. And we will be briefed by SpaceX on their NGSO satellite broadband constellation plans next quarter. We will continue further discussions in fourth quarter on NGSO spectrum needs and spectrum sharing with NGSO and unmanned aerial systems. So in terms of our UAS discussions, during the third quarter, most of our resources were spent on classification, identifying relevant issues, and formulating recommendations. The goals of the discussions that we've been having, and this is not meant as a mission statement for the working group, but rather the discussion that I'm reporting on today, was we collected and classified industrial spectrum needs for unmanned aircraft systems, and we classified them as small UAS recreational, small UAS commercial, and other UAS commercial operators. And that was actually done over a great deal of conversation and discussion. So the point was to identify issues for the FCC and FAA resolution to clear the way for use of spectrum for unmanned aerial systems. So what is UAS in a nutshell? At one point, believe it or not, we tried to put all of these terms into buckets under different regulatory agencies, and we kept on having discussions over, gee, that everything belongs in every bucket, so we debucketized it and
smeared it.
And instead identified just the swim lanes for responsibility. The FCC clearly having spectrum management, the FAA having safety of life, and NASA taking the lead on traffic management. It should be noted, however, that there are many areas that are researching traffic management possibilities, and almost every technical institution with a tech in their name has a program underway, it seems. So moving ahead to our base definitions, just to walk you through and to give you a feeling for what it is we're talking about, with some degree of being specific. The small unmanned aircraft, that's something weighing less than 55 pounds, including everything on board or attached to the wings or any part of it. And that means that there's nobody who can intervene who is present on that craft. So obviously if a person was in the craft, they'd be present and probably weigh more than 55 pounds. But the unmanned craft can be used for recreational or commercial purposes. So that becomes an input to small UAS, small unmanned aircraft system. So that's something that is the small unmanned aircraft, and then includes all of the elements with making it work properly. So control, any kind of part of the system that is required for safe operation of the unmanned aircraft in the national airspace system is what is generally meant by a small UAS. Recreational use, this is hobby, recreation, fun. This is not for making money or collecting data for fun, even for commercial purposes. This is just things you want to do. And so there's two ways you can fly recreationally. One is to fly in accordance with special rule for model aircraft, and the other is basically the Part 107 rules that the FAA has put out. For Part 107 commercial use, you have a very inclusive definition of commercial. So this means that if it's anything in the furtherance of a business, whether or not you're actually collecting money for the flight, that doesn't matter. You're out collecting data, that's commercial. So that means, there's a list, and that list is going to get repeated later in the presentation. Part 107 must give way to manned aircraft, operate within visual line of sight, fly during daylight, in twilight within minimum weather visibility of 3 miles, control station, fly below 400 feet above ground level, refrain from flying over anybody not participating in the operation, and the operator must have a remote pilot airman certificate and be 16 years or older, and only operate one of these things at a time. Now that leads immediately to Part 107 waivers, because not everybody's use case is going to comply with all of those conditions. And so those waivers have to do with operating from a moving vehicle or aircraft, operating something other than broad daylight, operating something other than visual line of sight operations, operating multiple units, or operating over people are the big hitters. And then anything that is not Part 107 for commercial use, we just basically threw together in one big category. And that is big in many ways. So here's a pictorial view of what we've been thinking about. So you've got your recreational stuff, and you can see a little quadcopter. It's got a camera hanging off of it, and there's no direct safety requirement, but that doesn't mean that there's no liability for hurting people if you do something wrong. It does have registration. There are limitations that we've talked about: visual line of sight below 400 feet above ground level. You can't fly it near airports or other sensitive areas. For the 107 commercial, you can see, this is the category where we would include things like delivery services of packages or pizzas or burritos. And it has, you can see it's bigger, and clearly if it's going to be delivering packages, it's going to be going over people, so there's going to be waivers involved. And that gives rise to additional safety and reliability requirements that are going to be associated with those 107 waivers. Then the picture on the right, you can see a big aircraft, and the range here, you can imagine one day somebody like a FedEx not wanting to have pilots on board and just fly the boxes around. It could happen one day. And that's going to have all kinds of risks associated with it, and you're going to have to meet criteria that comply with those use cases. So this has a huge range in terms of what you're talking about, and this would, include things like HAPS and things that fly at very high altitude. So this is a fairly broad group, but it's also, since they're operating large and expensive aircraft, probably well placed to come in and express their special needs and figure out what those rules are going to be so that they can operate safely.
Steve, one quick question. Since most of the recreational use is not under Part 107, why did you choose to emphasize the 107 on the chart?
We chose to emphasize it actually, and to follow through with categorizing that way, because the working group arrived at that as being a good way to make a distinction of what is possible, and because 107 does actually apply.
But recreational use is by...
Just for fun, yes.
Yeah. Which is right now, that may change, but right now the preponderance of drones are recreational use items which are governed by actual legislation, not regulation. And as you point out, when you put the definition, so it was a point of curiosity as to why you would...
Well, the working group basically, I would say, is comprised of people who are largely in the drone, especially our net contributors come from the drone industry or some aspect of it, and so that was a sharp point that they wanted to draw. So we drew it.
Okay.
Steve, if I may, Mr. Chairman, it's Paul Meisner from Amazon. Steve's shown terrific leadership in corralling this kind of a hodgepodge of a group so far. But I think all this has to be viewed as quite a bit a work in progress. This is an initial report, and I think a lot of these definitional matters, some of the classifications, still haven't been completely worked out. For example, it may not make sense to consider separately recreational and non-recreational use if the equipage on the vehicles are similar. And so these kinds of things we're going to be discussing. So, that kind of input is really helpful, it seems to us, because we do have to work through this in the coming months.
Very good,
Thank you.
Paul. Thank you.
Great example of the contributions of our working group. Whoops. So, moving ahead. So, spectrum considerations. As we have talked about this, and we spent a fair bit of time, the recreational stuff often is just using unlicensed spectrum, both for command and control and for their payload. And so, but we did highlight that in red. They're, unlicensed is Part 15. We identified all of the different FCC rules and rule parts that apply, and we at first had different bubbles under each of these, and we eventually decided that it was better to stretch that bubble out to go over Part 107 and for recreational and commercial. And then we identified the spectrum considerations for non-Part 107 and included satellite FSS and L-band MSS as possibilities and things that are in play and should be and that are really ways that one could control these things. So in terms of the traffic management of unmanned aerial systems, we have been leaning heavily on our NASA presentation and have taken these slides directly from that presentation. The way in which the slides that we've selected from that presentation start by looking at the functions for the operator and for the traffic management system and splitting that out. So you have things, you have the airspace management, which is obviously the traffic management system, and then you have the operator, and the operator has to broadcast their identity, possibly what their intent is. The operations have to be accessible by all, and there's no anonymous flying. So that you can't just go up there and not be identified. You can, everything has to be identifiable, and that's key to knowing if you tracking down bad actors, and would be key towards things for enforcement and making sure that people are following rules. That being said, when we continue, a different slide plucked out of that presentation, and look at the functions, the first thing I notice is look at the mantra. We're going to be flexible where possible and structure where needed. In other words, we don't exactly know what we're doing yet, and we're figuring it out. And the second mantra is, risk-based, geographic needs, application and performance-based airspace operations. So you don't want to over-regulate and constrain things, but on the other hand, you need to be safe. So then breaking it down, the functions, you have route structure, flow control, air traffic control, the basic things one would expect to have to pay attention to. Now, looking at the timeline that for the UTM technical research, you can see that this thing is stretching all the way out to March 2019 for what one might consider full-on operations. And that's, I think, speaks to the learning by doing, still figuring things out, and still needing to do a number of things to actually get these things right.
Steve, may I just really quickly, I think it's important to point out to the group as we're looking at these kinds of dates, that these may be dates planned right now for the full-blown UTM, but it doesn't mean that there won't be operations well in advance of the UTM taking place.
Excellent point. There are those who are in seeking the exceptions, waivers required in order to go ahead and fly sooner than that. And your point is well taken. This is for overall UTM traffic management operations. It doesn't mean we couldn't safely operate delivery drones or something like that at a sooner date. So recent headlines, it actually came out just a few weeks ago. Google's delivering burritos to Virginia Tech with winged drones. The patent of Amazon gives a peek at just how ambitious their drone delivery project is. Facebook's Aquila drone completes its first test flight. AT&T tests drones on its LTE network to prepare for deliveries, and then Qualcomm and AT&T are joining forces. So I'm really getting a cut at the bottom. So there's a lot of major players involved here, and so I think that is part of what is giving rise to the great deal of participation that we've been having and a lot of the discussion. So moving ahead.
Major players represented around this table, I might add.
Yes. We've developed a comparison matrix of applications. Some of this is a bit redundant to what we've been saying, but the Part 107 commercial, if you look at the list, it's quite wide-ranging. It goes across a number of different use cases, everything from photography, package delivery, agriculture, fleet services. And then if you look at the non-Part 107, I would point out that being non-Part 107 does not only mean that you're greater than 55 pounds. You can be non-Part 107 and be under 55 pounds. So it's an important distinction. And in the commercial services, you have the unmanned commercial aircraft that we talked about, public safety, and federal use. So, you putting up a question?
Yeah. Steve, a question on that, Dave Simpson. Right now, you just list public safety on the greater than 55 pounds, but you can think of a number of uses for public safety with the smaller drones, and in both cases, it seems to me that that the group should be looking at public safety spectrum as well, and Part 90, and I didn't see that referred to in your first slide, and we could use your recommendations on what would apply here. There are a number of public safety rules that do cover public safety air-to-ground use, as public safety entities, of course, use very capably traffic copters and other kinds of aerial vehicles, and knowing what would be different about their UAS use, we would want to get ahead in our rulemaking.
Okay. Thank you. You will see later that we do have Part 90 listed.
Okay, thanks. in the right category too.
Thank you. We put in a fair bit of work to try and be inclusive and to capture this classification as accurately as possible. I can't say that we've gotten everything perfect yet, so your input is very welcome. So on payload links, this is something we haven't actually spent too much time talking about in the working group, and something we plan to talk about more in fourth quarter. But it has been discussed that HAPS allocations have been laid out by the ITU, but have not been are not yet enabled in the U.S., but have been in other countries. And so there's that's just a factual statement. And as I understand it, those discussions are underway, so there's not much to say more than that, other than it might be a limiter right now in terms of deployment in the U.S. The UTM, that's still under discussion for the working group, and so that's whoa. And for the large commercial stuff, we're thinking in terms of core air traffic control and so on. But of course, you have to be careful that some of those could be small guys and flown differently. So you can see where we have a huge amount of disparity in use cases, and therefore it gets to be somewhat of a challenge to categorize these things. So getting on to the parts where we're really trying to say something and get to recommendations. In the command and control, we list out the parts that we see today and expect to be used in the future. We are recommending that the FCC study the interference risk from wide use of spectrum. So things like unlicensed spectrum being used very widely for recreational use. What might that do to things on the ground? And that so that kind of a study should be undertaken. And Pierre had proposed such a study in the past, which we reported on. The FCC should notify services adjacent to frequency bands of possibility of harmful interference, and you'll see these recommendations repeated on the next page. And then you may not be required for visual line of sight for traffic management, but we're seeking clarification from FAA or other working group experts on that matter. So now, same thing for Part 107 commercial UAS. So the FCC should consider how to support visual line of sight and eventually beyond visual line of sight with terrestrial networks, and whether all data and safety needs can be met via one system that might include MSS satellite spectrum. The working group discussions are going to be focused on recommendations during the fourth quarter for that. The FCC should, again, invite the same interference studies that we mentioned on the previous page, as well as letting people know in adjacent bands of the possibility of harmful interference. Safety certification, Part 107 waivers. FAA is managing in consultation with the relevant stakeholders, including UAS community and wireless carriers. So certain safety features may require unique implementation depending on specific frequency bands and their associated FCC regulations. And the FCC is continuing collaboration with FAA on such instances. So we're getting a huge cut at the bottom of the, now I think we're getting to where that might actually matter. Excuse me. Right. So, of course, the last one is continuing collaboration FA with instances and, wait a second, sorry. I'll just refer you to the paper for that line. So the future FCC actions for non-Part 107 commercial UAS. FCC should initiate rulemaking process to establish service rules according to WRC 12 and 15. And I believe that the FCC is looking at that. Is that right, Michael?
That's right.
Yep. So on payload spectrum, there's further working group discussion in fourth quarter I already mentioned. Expect satellite or other commercial links will be utilized. And that, of course, is going to give rise to sharing and other considerations. Safety certification, the FAA is going to manage with consultation with relevant stakeholders, including our TCA and ICAO. Certain safety features may require specific use of frequency bands or subject to FCC regulations. The FCC's continued collaboration with FAA on those instances. So the traffic management, the FAA is managing with consultation with NASA and relevant stakeholders. Future FCC action for non-Part 107 commercial, that's the ongoing consultation with NASA, command and control, initiate rulemaking process to establish the service rules for WRC 12 and 15, and on the payload spectrum, that's not safety critical, but it could be commercially critical, and so that and is likely to require far more bandwidth than command and control, though that is also a subject of study. Satellite and other commercial links may be a solution in some cases, but investigations are required to determine how airborne usage affects existing users sharing or using adjacent spectrum. Given that sharing is becoming more and more the norm, that kind of a study and better understanding is going to be required so that we can maximize the capabilities in terms of delivery. Whoops. Yes, sir.
On the point about payload spectrum not being public safety critical, I think it's important to carve out, except when the payload is intended for public safety purposes or where public safety obligations should convey. So, for example, if the payload is designed to be part of a rapid restoral of a damaged wireless network in an area, I would expect 911 obligations to apply to that flying eNode B. So I would hope that you didn't intend to convey too much on that.
Okay. Thank you for, yes, you're right. For public safety purposes or restoral of commercial services critical to public safety.
Those are just two examples.
Yes.
There would be a wide range of public safety obligations, though I think it would depend on what the payload's being used for. Similarly, payloads that have a critical public safety role would need to be, they will be critical infrastructure as we go forward.
You're right. I invite you to join our working group and help us work through that. We have not represented public safety here.
Well, I would invite you to join us as Paul does regularly. So if you'd like, we can jumpstart that and have a discussion, maybe on one of your upcoming phone calls.
Okay. You have a question?
I think David was first.
Two questions. One, I can't see the charts now. One of the recommendations, and it probably, I think came up in a recommendation and in a future action, was FCC to initiate rulemaking. Is that a statement of fact that there's a train that's left the station, or are we recommending rulemaking? That's from a tech perspective. I'm just not sure we usually do that, so that's why I wanted to. I just didn't understand the wording there.
So
on page 19.
Yeah. So I think there is an implementation. So the FCC has already taken action for implementation of a WIC 12 recommendation, where we have done the allocation of the band already. Now the TAC working group is recommending FCC to create some sort of proceeding to come up with a service rule so that those bands can be actually used. So I think that's the next step that the TAC working group is recommending for us to move on.
Right.
Let me just add a couple of things. That spectrum is a pretty limited intended application. It's license use. It doesn't address. Maybe I'll just offer a couple of comments on top. Really pleased at the distinction in the types of UAS, and that we don't try to lump everything in one bucket, because I think that's the distinction Dave's getting at. Also, that I'm glad to see here it didn't just say give more spectrum to UAS, because we have lots of services that line up and would like to have their own block, and we'd love to please everybody, but that's just not feasible. So the more as you work through this, thinking in terms of specifics, because there's so many different uses. We have some of the hobbyist type uses in the unlicensed spectrum, and I want to come back to that in a minute. And then we've got things like commercial wireless networks potentially being used, and so trying to think about how do all these pieces fit together and what's needed. Plus, and as David Wells knows, we're working closely with other agencies throughout government to try to give some coherence to all of the different pieces fitting together in a sensible way. I loved your block. I don't know why it was between FCC and I think FAA for the pizza delivery. You could put that a little more on our side. One thing about the study on, because I think it was directed at the unlicensed bands of things being elevated, and do a study of interference.
We actually were suggesting that for both recreational and the 107 commercial.
So just thinking about it, first of all, resources don't come easy. So just saying do a study, with all the other things that we have, may or may not be something we're able to fit in. But if there's something that points to, well, there's a potential problem, or because we've had, for example, the unlicensed devices that are operating out there now, and to my knowledge, they really haven't caused a problem. And I always get wary about, be careful think through a little bit about where things might lead. And so, for example, we've got Wi-Fi devices that are on tall buildings, so we talk about that you can't be used above a particular height. We've got Wi-Fi being used on planes. So, where do we draw these distinctions? And so I try to think about that a little bit, before we dive in and start spending a lot of resources, whether there's really where in the overall scheme of things, is this something that would be nice to know or we really think is a potential issue? So great work. I think everybody has got a piece of this throughout Washington and in industry. And the good news is that we're all trying to work together to make this make sense of all the pieces.
Yeah, if I may add, Steve, I think you may want to look at some of the other countries that are maybe advanced in drone regulations. For example, Poland today has a very relaxed drone regulatory framework in which they only allow visual line of sight as a framework for managing drones. Whereas Australia and other places managed by altitude. And both of these countries and others are leveraging both unlicensed and licensed spectrum. for both payload and otherwise. So it might be interesting to look at a variety of these frameworks that have been applied. I know it's still kind of work in progress, even in these advanced countries, but might be worth looking at that and seeing how we can maybe leverage that here.
Thank you. So,
Dale Hatfield?
close. Oh,
We're just about done. We should have let you finish your presentation, but.
I thought we were.
Dale, no. We still
Two
have-
slides left.
Yeah, 2 slides left, yeah. Dale, please.
I know that some towns sometimes sound like a broken record or a one-trick pony. Is that the expression? But when I hear about the potential for drones, and I hear David Simpson talking about its use in public safety applications, I have to point out again, it really bothers me, this jamming and spoofing issue in these types of systems, and may have opportunity to say a little bit more about that later. But I think we certainly ought to keep it in the back of our minds that the vulnerabilities of these type systems to jamming and spoofing.
Yeah, I'd like to associate with Dale's comments that we now have the ability for RF harm to be done over a much larger area, much more quickly than jamming and spoofing threats had in the past been thought of. And one of the things that Julie alluded to that we're working on with the interagency is what should be built in, what should be baked in the way of addressing good drones in bad hands. And should there be a built-in ability to ensure that cease buzzer, that a payload that is beginning to interfere negatively can, through the command and control mechanisms, in fact, be turned off or limited, or should there be actions through this C2 mechanism that actually sends a return to base command, and then if so, what authentication target should be in there to ensure that that the actions are actually the intended actions. Thanks, Dale.
Okay, Steve, why don't we let you finish your last 2 slides, and then we'll go to the official comment time.
Oh, I take it as a mark of interest that people are asking questions as we go. Okay. And then the last bit for future actions for non-Part 107 commercial is FAA is managing with consultation of relevant stakeholders, including RTCA and ICAO. Certain safety features may require specific use of frequency bands subject to FCC regulations, and the FCC should continue collaborating with the FAA on such instances. So our work plan for fourth quarter, one is just to continue to better understand industry perspectives. So we will have more presentations from the industry. One of the things that we're inviting is for capacity estimates that might be available from industry, especially regarding command and control, because that is safety critical just to operate, whether or not your intent is to do harm. You need to get it right, and there's a question of, as you have a dense deployment, how much spectrum do you really need in order to keep track of these things? And that's an interesting trade-off, because there's the needs depend upon, to some degree, the capabilities of the drones themselves. They can be somewhat autonomously flying, just like you have Uber cars autonomously driving. And so how much do you really need, and what might the trade-offs be? The study types needed to understand capacity requirements. I think this goes to Julia's comment that, be careful what you ask for, and if you do ask, try to ask specifically, not just a broad thing. And then we want to look at, detect, and avoid spectrum issues. Those turn out to have spectrum requirements as well. And to look at the payload spectrum discussions, we've talked about that. And then beyond visual line of sight, satellite discussions. So there's, we want to look at HAP's outstanding issues for the working group. Recreational, we want to collect input that has not been well represented in our working group discussions to date. And for commercial, we believe that we can further organize and refine our recommendations. Thank you. So,
very good. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for the working group. Are there questions or comments that people? David, please.
Where a payload will be using backhaul, do you consider that backhaul function to be a part of C2, or is backhaul part of payload, or should backhaul be a third bucket?
I see, if what you're talking about is, do you have a communications payload that might be providing streaming internet service, so it has both downlink and uplink?
Well, let's just use an example where you're sending in a node to restore wireless service to an area, and you need a high-capacity backhaul that you're going to use a higher frequency, an antenna pointed in a different direction to maybe a daisy chain of UAS that will get it back down to a terrestrial node. It would seem that there will be a developing need for backhaul, high capacity, and that because it would be using antennas with a different orientation, that at least from a definitional standpoint, determining whether or not you're going to discuss that as part of the payload, or whether or not backhaul is a different category would be helpful.
I'd been thinking of it as part of the payload, but you bring up an interesting point with the daisy chaining of UAS.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Michael Ha.
I just wanted to follow up on Dave's question that I think the challenge we had in the working group is that sort of a question brings up a different type of discussion, depends on which bucket of UAS you're looking at. If you're looking more on the commercial side, the command control or NC non-payload communication specifically prevents payload to be used for that dedicated spectrum as recommended by ITU. So from their perspective, it's going to be 100% payload. Versus if you're looking at more of recreational and smaller UAS groups, I think there will be, looking at both payload versus command and control. It can go either way. So it's kind of application specific. And then the model that you specifically mentioned, the example is really the area platform technology we started looking into. It's more of a, satellite communication in a way. You got all the feeder link spectrum, basically, that's what it is, versus a UAS delivering certain application-specific video streaming or safety-related commands. So it's kind of a blend of multiple platforms we're looking at, but certainly worth looking into and have some feedback from the working group.
Right.
Any questions or comments from those on the phone?
We're good.
Okay. Just a couple comments from me then. One of the challenges always is to, and it's already been hit on by Julie, is to hit actionable recommendations. So you have a fair number of recommendations, but getting them down to things that can be acted upon is really key focus. And certainly this is broader than just your working group. This is a watchword for everyone, and we'll get into that at the end. But that would be a comment from me. The other one is a purely parochial comment, and that is within the context of recreational use, there is a special category that is near and dear to my heart and a couple of my colleagues, and that is the educational use, which is usually a subset of recreational, but sometimes not. So you may want to move into that space, at least for a quick look. because it's beginning to be a larger part of the landscape. It's certainly one that has a key focus from the people in the aerospace engineering kind of curriculum, but it's in other areas as well. A number of universities, University of Colorado as one of them, have had a huge focus in this area of UAVs and flying in formation and all sorts of exciting things that are done within the academic world. So you might take a special look at that one.
Okay.
Just offer in that regard, Intel did a pretty impressive thing in Sydney earlier this year, where by having hundreds of UAVs fly in formation, they replaced fireworks over Sydney in really a very impressive display. It's just amazing the kinds of use cases that are out there. I would think disability rights also might be the disabilities community might be a niche where there would be benefit to accessibility that would fit in that category. If you think of the number of areas in national parks that are off limits to people with disabilities, being able to have that same experience with fleets of UAVs, you guys are doing great work, and we keep shoveling stuff into the same bucket, but thanks.
Great. All right. Seeing no other raised tent cards, we'll thank you for the good work, and we'll move on to Adam Trabat and the exciting area of future technologies with specific focus on 5G this time around. I guess, Kevin, you are on the line somewhere in Europe as well?
Yes, I am.
All right, very good. Okay, Steve, if we could pass the clicker on down. Thank you.
I'm going to let Adam do most of the talking this time. I've had my shots before.
Okay, Adam, take it away.
So what I'm going to talk about is the outcome from the Future Game Changing Technologies Working Group. And let me start off with kudos to Kevin Sparks, who's on the phone, who's going to chirp up in several parts of this. And I'd say Kevin really bore the brunt of actually putting the document together and did a super job on that. Last year we took a look at a basket of technologies. Two of those bubbled up as being the most important. One was 5G and the other was programmable networks. So if you look at this year's charter, it centers around those two. There's a third item which really deals with the fast pace of change in telecommunications and what it's all about. And then lastly, continuing to troll for new technologies. So 4 areas that we're taking a look at. Again, a great group. I have to say we spent Friday afternoons before long weekends, sometimes amazed by the attendance. And we do have a couple of subgroups. Brian Daly and Charla Rath are looking after 5G. Mark Bayless started off on our activity with programmable networks, has continued to participate. And then Nomi Bergman taking a look at how does the FCC keep up with all of these technology changes. So I'm going to skip through that. We have had, I would say, quite a few SME presentations, both on advanced technologies and on the two key topics, and a lot of cooperation with Russ Gehrig and John Barnhill and the NGI group, so quite a bit of crossover activity that's been going on, essentially. So let me start off with the first part of this, And that is, when you take a look at the FCC, one of the things we spend a lot of time and energy on is how does it get the right mindset for the future? And, having participated previously in doing the transition from PSTN to IP, I would say the new thought here is that there isn't just a simple transition from A to B. It is a continuous transition as technology evolves, and there really is a very broad basket of technologies that is evolving at this point in time. And so that deals with what is the mindset on the FCC in terms of its approach to regulation, its approach to keeping up with what's going on. And then lastly, I think consumers and users of communications technology have their own mindset. So for example, what somebody will care about is how does my app work? How does it work well? Not necessarily all of the plumbing that's underneath, but I can tell you when they have a problem, there's one place they'll come to, and it's called the FCC. Okay? So, and I'm not going to sort of read through all of these key thought view graphs because we have quite a few here, but it's the motivation for, I think, what you'll be hearing from us as a group. The next item is programmable networks, and again, in regard to that, trying to keep up, on both sides of this. All of a sudden, I think you have a tangle between what happens in the communication world, what happens in the cloud world, the area of fog, open use of networks, virtualization at the edge, open source software. Okay, and while you have the benefits from reduced cost, improved security, and agility for new products, you have a much more complex world with a lot of issues that may not be traditional for the FCC to deal with. Okay? And I just wonder, Kevin, I think if you want to add a few thoughts to it, it would be good to see some color from you.
Okay. I think the only thing I would add would be that the idea here that the mindset we ought to have is that we've seen a huge transformation and buildup of value in the cloud world, in cloud-based applications, and a lot of that's been based on the kind of virtualization, efficiencies and flexibility and programmability that you see in the pure cloud world. And we should really expect to see almost that same level of value creation, flexibility, opening up new business models and everything else in the networking world. So if programmable networks sounds futuristic, so did what's been happening in cloud for the past decade. Sounded futuristic before that.
Thank you. Okay. So I'd say the next issue to sort of simplify all of this is when you look at the rapid change which I mentioned earlier, there really are 4 dimensions to it. The first one is convergence, okay, where it's becoming harder to look at the delivery of a service, okay, without, at this point in time, having to actually look at the underlying technology of how that service is delivered. So it'll be convergence between the wireless world and the wireline access world, really sort of technology agnostic. The second is disaggregation of services. The third one is virtualization and sharing of resources. And the last one is dynamic consumption. And what we have is a little bit more on each of these issues. So the first one is when you take a look at convergence, the drivers are that the access technology, for example, is blurring. So when I look at something like 5G, you can think of it as part of the cellular networks that we have enjoyed because of mobility, but you can also look at some of the capabilities as really being part of an access network. If you take a look at the radio access network, backhaul coupling, essentially very much the same kind of thing going on. The converged edge clouds, essentially, where a lot of the processing can happen. And then the last one is that orders of magnitude wireless capacity scaling, which really makes wireless to be used in a very different world. So if you take a look at the industry and FCC consequences, I'd say the first part is that wireless networks will benefit from access to the wireline assets. I would say for those areas which may be more rural and remote, hybrid satellite networks, the whole transformation dealing with SDN and NFV. I'd peripherally say we sort of left out the security issues because we knew that Paul's group was dealing with those. And then lastly, I would say, is conflict with the FCC and the regulatory architecture that we have sort of traditionally seen structured along wireless and wireline lines. Okay, the next area is disaggregation, and I would say the most important aspect of this is really that it's now much harder to understand who the players are, to understand who has what obligations in a much more complex chain, and the distinctions that we have had in the past between who is and who isn't an operator really may be too rigid and really may be in the way of some of the innovations that are possible. The next area is virtualization and sharing. Again, further segmentation and blurring of the roles in the service chain. And I would say sort of personally, once you discover that you can do things, you're sure that somebody will try it. And there is a tremendous amount of experience and value that's likely yet to come that's hard to imagine at this point in time. Okay? So if you take a look at what are the drivers for this, very diverse use cases for 5G, the ability to create virtualized slices, which means a lot more orchestration throughout the network, and opportunities for network sharing, whether it's radio resources, edge computing, edge storage. I think all of those become important, and then better utilization of scarce resources such as spectrum. And I would say lastly on that list was the enabler for 5G low latency applications, which really sort of enlarges the basket of the kind of networks that will no longer need dedicated spectrum. And then the last one is dynamic consumption, and allow it again, taking a cue from some other industries, efficiency of pay as you need in terms of how you utilize resources, the ability to share opportunities end to end, de-risk and encourage service business model experimentation. And I would say the heart, and again, one of the agendas for the FCC is how do you create that engine for innovation, essentially. So if you look at this particular area in terms of industry and FCC consequences, I would say the first one is the network service delivery must be fully automated and API driven, very different from the way we do it today. Service offerings and entities will come and go in much shorter cycles. There'll be a lot more players because you have lowered the threshold to participate in this kind of activity. And really a need for environments where the regulatory regime operates on much shorter cycles than it's used to in the past. Okay. And then I would say the next, before I go to the next issue, Kevin, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Adam, you did a great job covering all the aspects, so I'll just highlight kind of a high-level comment, and that is that we do expect to see a tremendous amount of value creation here, because I know I'm kind of sticking on this point, but a lot of value creation, we've seen it in clouds before. We're now going to see another level of it, I think, where large global players can do global features, but combine it with kind of local delivery of that service, whatever kind of thing it is. It's content, or it's a AR gaming application, or it's whatever. So a lot of value creation out of that, and of course we want to reap that value creation within the U.S. market, get a disproportionate share of that. So why this is all important, why it's important that the FCC understands really well these kind of four dimensions as we laid them out of change, is because it may be a fairly complicated task to sort out which regulations are potentially would get in the way of innovation in this area, and obviously it's in all of our interest to get out, have the regulations get out of the way of, and it's not just regulations, but just the way in which things are done based on the older world, more static world. So the more we can do that, the more value creation we can capture, here at home.
Okay, thank you. So I think the next issue, when you look at all this dynamics, the greater degree of complexity that the FCC faces, I would say we sort of capture in a thought which we call a greater need for systems thinking. And good engineering is sort of divide and conquer things into good silos, and that served the FCC well for quite a bit of time. But if you take a look at how services are delivered today, that blending of technologies, when somebody is about to deliver a service, it can go over any of them. And the ability to dynamically understand how the systems that are being built out are working, what affects what. I think we went through an example in one of the previous talks, looking at an issue like backhaul for something like UAVs. It's part of a fairly complex system, okay? And various technologies have to be considered at the same time when you look at things. The kinds of mashups you find today, the use of common IT technologies, and really the rapid pace of change put a premium on sort of understanding consequences of what may happen, but really sharpening up the way we do the systems thinking. So what I'm going to transition to next is 5G networks, and get a few points across. I'm not going to read through everything, but the first one is it isn't a single technology. It's really quite a complex basket of technologies that will continue to drive performance and deliver new functionality. That each of the technologies, in fact, has its own life and its own trajectory. Whether we put that 5G label on it or not, they're likely to be utilized one way or another. And while 5G technologies represent an evolution of existing capabilities, they also add a lot of new things that I think will drive completely new applications, many of which will surprise us. Okay? So if you refer to the past, there's a good law called Amara's Law. It's an example of it. We tend to overestimate what we do right now, but really underestimate what happens in the long run. And then if you look at 5G networks, they're there because they will deliver value. We have a glimmer of a few things, enabling a higher video resolution, Pokemon Go out of the chute and on the loose. Okay. I don't know whether the FCC is responsible for pedestrians bumping into each other and into cars, but okay.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. The tactile internet. Okay.
You're responsible for everything.
Everything. Okay. But IoT, fixed wireless access that we have mentioned before, and really sort of totally new capabilities on high reliability and low latency. Okay? So quite a bit happening there. I'd say that the next one is that the driver in all of this, we may be interested in the technology of those networks, but it's really about applications. How do you enable them? And, with 5G, with programmable networks, what you can do in the application world really explodes on you incredibly. Okay? And again, that systems view becomes extremely important. I'd say in all of this, and I think, I don't know whether Julie is going to be smiling or not, but spectrum utilization, all kinds of people will show up and ask for more. Okay. But what we seem to be actually doing is putting more and more stuff over the common infrastructure. And I would say there is a lot of technology that we heard about during our deliberations, all kinds of advanced antennas, reconfigurable antennas, signal processing, that really show us that there is a lot of promise in improved efficiency that can happen. And I would say as you're opening up the higher frequencies, without some form of agility and beamforming, it's really very hard to get value out of that part of the spectrum. And then lastly, while there is more spectrum at higher frequencies, the spectrum at the lower frequencies that has very good propagation and penetration characteristics is becoming a rarer and rarer quality, and in fact being able to get the efficiency and better use of that spectrum becomes important. I would say the next one is awareness, transparency, and openness.
Adam, if I could interrupt.
Sure.
You're advancing yours, but you're not advancing the screen. So
Very
you're perfectly on track, but no one else is following you.
Yes. Okay, spectrum utilization. So awareness, transparency, and openness. I think Dale Hatfield gets the credit for opening the discussion on this. But it's really, again, a couple of key thoughts. The softwareization of the network is happening. We have some things going through standards bodies, but it's really hard to predict exactly how things will evolve. And in some ways, there is no overall architect of tomorrow's networks. There are lots of bodies that participate, but this is, in the IP world, you have a loosely coupled system, okay? And somehow in that world, it's important to anticipate the consequences, okay, of how the architectures actually happen, okay, what impact they have on critical services, and what impact they have on common societal goals. Okay? And the next thing is, if you take a look at goods and services delivered in our domestic marketplace, again, for electronic goods, the scale and size of the market, increasingly international and global, really affects what we can and can't do and the affordability of things. Okay? And that means it's important to participate and understand what's happening not just domestically, but in the supply chain internationally and in international standards bodies. And I think the last one is that it's important for the FCC to have the insight into the architectures that are emerging and sufficient capability internally to actually impact that and guard it, so the consequences are things that we can live with, because we do have a different outlook on things than the rest of the world may. Okay? So examples of societal needs are things like Next Generation 911, disability access, the ability to enforce the regulations against interference, things like lawful intercept, network security, public safety, intellectual property protection, and the whole debate on privacy and transparency and openness. So basically, while you may have positive impacts because of technology, negative impacts can happen and have to be guarded against. At the same time, when we look at the FCC's broad mission, communication networks have such an incredible impact on the economy, on the jobs that are available in the economy. So I think for Marty Cooper's, I would say, contribution, paying attention and really understanding the applications end, where the value is, becomes increasingly important. Okay? And those applications, I would say, drive some of the requirements for the future, are the basis of some of the innovation that's likely to happen. And I think it's just as important to make sure that there is innovation in those areas where the societal value is great, okay? Because I think when you look at the way the industry functions, each of the players at the table who's either an operator or a producer of equipment and services and software will look after their own benefits. There has to be somebody at the table and processes where we look at the broader value. So I think in looking at what we have debated and discussed so far this year, we've broken things up into 3 areas for recommendations, which we hope will be included in the chairman's letter. The first area really deals with understanding, what is actually going on. The second with reassessment. The FCC is structured in a particular way, has a lot of regulations on the books. I would say the structure and the regulations need reassessment. And then lastly, there are issues where the FCC has an ability to project influence, where that influence is important. So those are the 3 areas of concern that we are addressing. And if I look at the first one, it is really to establish a program to understand, it's a program of excellence built around the future to understand end-to-end networks and systems. And we think that staff training and augmentation with some external activity, greater participation with industry and other agencies becomes very important. In that regard, we are actually about to do an exercise, I hope later this year, dealing with the Institute for the Future. and I would say involving some of the FCC staff and some members of the TAC to see whether we can create some value by doing that. The next area is reassessment, and that is to take a look at societal needs for economic growth, the organizational structure, I would say informed by that in-depth insight into industry impact on things like SDN, NFV, cloud, and 5G. And I would say the last one is really the creation of a watch list of priorities and essential needs for the U.S. market to guide a robust dialogue with industry and to make sure that those things that are enshrined in standardization really do meet our needs. Okay. And so we have started some draft recommendations at this point. What I should have up there, oops, I think I've probably gone a little too far. Okay. Are the specifics? The first ones deal with understanding. I'm not going to read through all of these right now. The next ones deal with reassessment, and again, sort of aimed at the structure within the organization and how it deals with technology today and what the needs are in the future, including that understanding of systems at large. Okay, and then the last one is in the area of influence, informed by education and assessment activities, creation of roadmaps, leveraging two-way learning and exchange with industry, and really frequent enough interactions to respond to changing situations in a timely way, because things really are changing on a continuous way at a fairly rapid pace. I think the next steps for the group are to deal with a few more SME talks. We are going to take a look at the integration of satellite services with 5G for rural areas, a deeper dive on emerging societal needs. I think the workshop that I mentioned earlier, assessment and summarization of some additional new technologies. I think what we've been concentrating on are things that are likely to improve spectrum efficiency. And what we hope to have for the December TAC is the results of the initial trial workshop and the final white papers and briefings on 5G and programmable networks, and a refined list of those actionable recommendations. Okay. Let me give the last word to Kevin. If you'd like to sort of chirp up and add a little bit to this.
Well, Adam, it was pretty complete. The only thing I think I'll add is in these recommendations, the three sort of phases of this: understand, reassess, and influence. These are fairly sweeping recommendations, and we will be making them more crisp. But I want to make sure it was clear that we view these as sort of sequential. They may be overlapping, but we think it's important to the FCC to develop a fairly good understanding. And I think the work that some of the work groups like this one and the NGI group, I think are a really good start to the understanding part. But that sort of needs to form a basis for the FCC to actually be able to sort of assess some of the rules, regulations, procedures, and organizational structure. And some of those assessments are really key for then really having that robust sort of interaction with the industry on in these technology areas what the real priorities for the FCC are that they can articulate and can sort of interact with those that are directly plugged into the related standards activities. So we think that this is fairly a pretty sweeping recommendation, but one that sort of has some natural steps to it. And that's all I have.
Very good.
Thank you.
No, it's always an exciting part of our agenda, going through our future technologies focus. And Pierre, I think you're the first up with your tent card. Pierre de Vries.
This was an amazing presentation. I think that this work that this working group is doing is probably, for my money, the single most important piece of work for what the FCC does in the long term. The thing that I just wanted to pick up on was particularly the work on programmable networks. You were saying the importance of systems thinking. And what struck me was, you were describing, a highly disaggregated system where each of the components have very rich coupling with all of the other components, and there's a huge amount of dynamics, right? That's a complex system. And as we've learned with all sorts of complex systems, from the financial system melting down to other things, these things have very interesting properties. Specifically, among other things, they tend to be locally robust and globally fragile. And so when we think about security, as we have done a couple of times today, I think that this takes that and kicks it up a notch. And so I would very much hope, and I am sure this group can do that, is to think about how the FCC, or whether the FCC can contribute to the resilience of these systems, the availability or the reliability. And when it comes to your recommendations, for example, I think it's mostly in the understand part, to some extent reassess as well. You talked about the org structure. I mean, the way I understood what's currently in the understand part, it was about, helping the FCC to understand what to regulate. What is this thing? What I'd also challenge the group to think about is, how does the FCC regulate this kind of thing?
So, Pierre, you brought up, I think, really a key point. And, I'm sort of used to, from the old Bell Corps, Bell Labs part of the world, think of things like resiliency in terms of 5/9 reliability. When you have systems of the kind we are walking our way into, each component will not have that kind of reliability. And yet it's some kind of, what I would say, level of redundancy, access to many technologies that may in fact provide better overall reliability than we've had in the past. There are pluses and minuses to this, but it really does take quite a bit of teasing apart, creating the right kind of tools, right kind of roadmaps to gain some understanding of this. And I think if I haven't emphasized it so far in the talk, it's really, how do you get the FCC on the other side of the equation so it's anticipating some of the things that will happen and not trying to catch up? And that's the reason for putting in that heavy-duty machinery that allows you to do the education and the understanding, so you're much better prepared to deal with the issues than encountering them in what I'll call a crisis mode.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, great question, and Adam's comment is really right on the mark. And just an analogy that I would use here is that in building, network systems, there's a lot of work going on in terms of figuring out how you ensure resiliency in this disaggregated world, where the responsibilities are fragmented across a lot of different entities. It used to be one entity sold the hardware, the software package all together, and if you take that up to the whole level of networks, and you think about, well, there's monolithic networks now, and then there's going to be sort of more of a disaggregation or a fragmentation of the roles of providing services. It's kind of a similar situation there, where the resiliency and the obligations and things like that now have to get done in a different way, potentially, than they were in the past, just because the underlying way that things are structured. But I also agree with Adam's comment that in the end, this will probably be more resilient because you're using the dynamics to make it more resilient because of your ability to react quickly to when something goes out of whack, to restore it, because you've got that kind of programmable or programmatic flexibility to fix it. But there's a long learning curve, in the industry and probably in the FCC as well, about how to do that, because you have to think about it differently.
Yeah, I just to respond to that, or you guys are running these networks. It may or may not be more resilient. I mean,
catastrophes happen.
The catastrophes happen, but I think the more important thing, perhaps, is that the behavior is different from what we're used to.
Absolutely.
So it'll fail in new ways.
Yep.
So I totally agree with that.
The one thing to add to all of this, and I think again prompted by Dale, is how do you propagate obligations that were very narrow, owned by one organization, when you now have this disaggregated system? And I'll give you an example. Power. In the old PSTN system, big stacks of batteries, it would run for such a period of time. All of a sudden, people are using all kinds of different devices, and much to your credit, you're trying to figure out how do you fill in. The question is, how could one have anticipated some of that and been better prepared for it? Okay. So, I think that's...
Are there going to be some potential resiliency issues in this new programmable architecture, because there's a smaller number of data centers which are controlling large parts of the network, and unlike today's IP where routers decentrally determine routing paths, the central determination exposes you to much greater risk, it seems to me.
Well, richer targets draw more fire, right?
Yeah, I mean, Marvin, that specific example, there is sort of the pure view that says that, every forwarding device in the network is open flow controlled directly, and every single flow is controlled. The conventional view is that you're still going to have distributed routing protocols working together with centralized, resource management and sort of global level controls. It's really a combination. You want the best of both. But that said, you certainly will have a lot of functions in data centers that used to be distributed in boxes across the network. And our kind of, one view is that over time, more and more of those nodes of the network will have, there'll be a lot of little data centers, because that's how all the piece parts are being made.
So on this topic of quote-unquote carrier grades and all that, yes, although SDN-NFV programmable network concept was originally applied to kind of data centers and everything, where carrier grades, 5 nines and everything were not that top of the list in the early stages, we need to note that the industry is working on is quite mindful of these deterministic performance, reliability, resiliency, and everything. We are not there yet, but forum like OPNFV, Open Daylights, they are definitely addressing this, and so it's a journey in progress. We're not there yet, and yes, certainly, we have seen even today's systems have failed catastrophically. I agree that because of the disaggregation and everything, there are new modes can fail. However, I think the industry is quite conscious, mindful of that, is working on it, but it's not there yet. And the fact that many of the carriers have now invested time and effort in working these open source communities is going to really improve the situation, I think.
Very good. Seeing no other tent cards in the room, any questions over the phone? Over the bridge? Hearing none, we'll move forward. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Kevin, for the great work. Thank you for the others that have participated. This is a remarkable group if you think about it in one respect. We've never had an actionable recommendation to reorganize the FCC in its entirety, but that seems to be coming down the pike from...
So just a little bit late.
We're sketching the new org chart as we start. We think we might not put the names on.
I want to respond about reorganizing the FCC. No.
You're the one to flip over your tent
No, just a couple things that I would add. There's a lot more education that goes on here than I think people are aware, and I want to make sure that that's getting fed back to the committee because we have brown bag folks coming in almost every week. And we've got a great FCC University program. So comparing what we have now to and getting that to the working group so they can see what we've been doing, and then maybe getting feedback on, I think what would be helpful at the end of this is maybe a draft of the list of topics and potential resources that we could go out to for that. And the other thing I would say, things like reorganizations and what's embedded in the COM Act and so forth, those are usually a heavier lift, so to speak. There's a lot of there's a lot of interaction that goes on between the bureaus and offices today, and any insights as you have in discussions on how we can do that better, because we really try among the offices, recognizing that the networks don't divide so easily anymore, to make sure that we get all the people with the right backgrounds and experience to the issue at hand.
I think Walter has told us about some of the activities that go on. It would be useful for one of our SME talks to actually have somebody who gives us a summary. It would actually be very useful.
Yeah.
And then the next thing is, I think what we were thinking of for the exercise with the Institute for the Future is to actually have good representation from several different offices in that exercise.
Good.
Okay? And I'd be remiss to say the following. While reorganization may be one thought, the real thought we think is that there isn't enough resources going to some of this kind of activity. So if you're pinched around the edges somewhere, okay, I think this is a license to ask for more.
Great, thank you. I think we'll move now to the next generation internet services. And Russ, it's so good to have you back here in physical presence, and John joining you, so take it away.
Hello. Okay, can you put up the next gen slides for us? All right, so I do want to call out our FCC liaisons because they've been really instrumental this past couple quarters in providing some good steerage as well as, I would say, on-hands help in terms of moving our recommendations. And we do have some firm recommendations to deliver at the end of this presentation. So just want to call out Walter, Scott, Alec, Brian, and Padma for their help and assistance, especially this past quarter as we firmed up some of these. And, of course, I want to recognize my co-chair here, John Barnhill. I think between the two of us, we've been able to balance the team over the summer vacation, which was fairly active. All right, so next slide. I also want to call out, every meeting, we have a weekly meeting. It truly is an honor, I think about it every meeting, to work with these esteemed industry leaders. And I'm not just saying that. These folks truly share technical things going on in their industry, in their companies, in the spirit of the TAC, very openly, so that we can move forward on some of our recommendations. That includes the vendors, the service providers, and all involved. So I just want to thank them and call them out. And at the bottom of the page, we also have other industry SMEs we've engaged, and we'll talk about some of those, and some key leaders like Al Morton and Michael Brown, who've made significant contributions as well. Moving forward, before I get off this slide, I would like to, especially as we move forward into the final lap here, invite Samsung, Intel, and Amazon, putting you guys on the spot here, to, and I've already got agreement from Samsung to get engaged, and I have a follow-up with Intel after this, to be engaged as we talk more about some of the improvements and efficiencies. But Amazon, we desperately would like your input as well. So, Paul, I'm not letting you off the hook. And the last thing to call out on this, we have a very strong liaison with the previous group, the game sharing group, that we kind of divide and conquer in terms of what we go after as we look at improvements and efficiencies. And we've even had co-SMEs present to both teams. All right. So getting the formalities out of the way and the thank yous. So really just our charter, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this eye chart. I think everybody's familiar with, we've shared this at each of the meetings, but we're really focused on one of the two real key deliverables here were meaningful metrics and improvements to the internet. So I think you'll see that come out in the next few slides as we cover those off. So what our goal was for this past quarter, our summer vacation, was to really secure the QoS metrics for the BIAS network. And I think we went above and beyond that, and you'll see that in the recommendation. Also, discussion on end-to-end QoS, which we got to part of that. True end-to-end QoS is kind of a difficult thing to achieve, but we'll talk a little bit more about that, and that'll be part of the last quarter work, as well as the improvements and efficiencies. We've started, and we'll continue on with that. And in fact, we'll be asking for the tax guidance as well as the FCC staff's guidance on specific thoughts they have on improvements and efficiencies. So these are the interviews and guest speakers we had. We had quite an active summer. As you can see, Broadband Forum, Verizon, AT&T, ITUT, Hulu, Comcast, Conviva, Facebook, academic researchers, Akamai, CTA, and 5G Group. So a lot of input, and we've boiled that down into some recommendations. And I would say, we really developed a pretty good liaison with BBF and CTA on driving some things on in-home, where you'll see our recommendation. Some of our key findings, though, video continues to dominate as the driving trend in growth on the internet. I don't think there's any surprise there. And we did focus a bit of our attention on CDN and some of those improvements. Market-based solutions are emerging to deliver improved video services. Marvin's going to talk a little bit more about that on the CDN aspects. Also, instrumented clients generate data to allow content providers to improve QoE to their end users. And service providers are really taking a deeper look at this as they start to manage more of the gateways in the home as a trend. And then changes in media formatting will lead to fewer versions of files and reduced network bandwidth demand. A lot of this is about creating greater efficiencies as the CDN market continues to evolve and has to evolve to support more and more video. And just wanted to bring out another thing. In our work with BBF, we spent a great deal of time looking at various standards of how testing could be done, from TR69 to TR304. And BBF's been a great liaison and group because they actually bring together the different standards organizations and standards and try to make it into something that's adaptable by the different service providers. So taking a look at the in-home QoS, QoE findings specifically, I think it's no surprise that modern service delivery is becoming more and more dependent on the quality of in-home networks. The interesting thing is most of your friends, probably relatives, they manage their own in-home network, and manage is a relative word there. They don't have the experience or tools. Many of them don't know when to end of life old router in the home, so they may be working on very old Wi-Fi standards and so forth, so the experience may be less than optimal. The other key point, there's really no public data available on current measurements within the home. There's few industry resources available for in-home measurement. And taking a look at the existing MBA program, the FCC's insight really stops at the demarc point as well. so they don't have a view of what's happening in the home, other than potentially from the mobile app that is available through MBA. So what we've observed is measurements from within the home. There's quite a few key stakeholders here that could benefit: the FCC, service providers, equipment makers, content providers, and consumers, in terms of understanding the constraints. And there's various areas of improvement, from unlicensed spectrum, and these may or may not include all the beneficiaries in the parentheses. Wi-Fi interference has quite a bit of impact to consumers, service provider, and even FCC. The impact due to the number of devices and legacy equipment, you could probably add equipment vendors to that list. And evolution of the service for future policy needs, both FCC and standards bodies are very interested in that. And of course, reducing trouble tickets would be of great interest to service providers and consumers. So our viewpoint is in-home is becoming, or is a very important piece of the whole broadband delivery. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Marvin to talk a little bit about CDN. Then we're going to dive into some of the QoS metrics and end with the in-home recommendations. So Marvin, you've got your...
We had a number of presentations from CDN operators and providers of streaming content in particular. We learned a number of things about the challenges of CDNs. The two worst cases are the Super Bowl, in one instance, when you've got lots of people watching, but you can't pre-position the content because it's all being generated live. And secondly, a rainy Saturday afternoon where everybody decides to watch a movie, but they all want to watch a different one. And so you again have a problem of not enough space in the cache. It gives an example of the kind of challenges that face the CDN sector. The CDN business started with companies like Akamai acting as third parties on behalf of lots of publishers, but increasingly the biggest providers of content are building their own CDNs. So we have Netflix and Amazon and Google and others who operate their own CDNs for their own content streaming. Video is the dominant number of bits that are being delivered, and video is stored today at a variety of different encoding rates, first because there are different devices receiving it that can handle different coding rates, but in addition, streams adapt to congestion by changing the coding rate that is delivered to the receiver, and the content is stored as a series of chunks with a manifest describing how to find each of the chunks at different coding rates. The problem is that there are multiple standards in widespread use, and even where the both standards differ both for the manifests and for the content chunks, work is being done on a common media application format that would at least standardize the containers for the encoded segments, even if manifests were different for different service providers, and that would greatly reduce the number of segment types that had to be stored at caches and significantly improve cache efficiency. In addition to caching by CDNs, some operators, particularly wireless ones, will cache using transparent caches or in some cases transcode data to lower data rates, reflecting the greater cost of bandwidth in the wireless sector. The increasing move to encryption is making that problematic. The counterbalancing trend is that caches are moving closer to customers, so there's less need for transparent caching, and proposals are being examined of whether encryption keys could be shared to enable ISPs to do transcoding, for example, for wireless, but that's a very ticklish problem. One thing that we're seeing is that caching locations, although they're fairly widely distributed, are not nearly as available in rural areas, causing potential another form of digital divide, if you will, in that they get less responsive performance than those in urban areas. And lastly, we learned that while 99% of over-the-top video is delivered as unicast TCP, work is being done on using UDP along with forward error correction as an alternative to TCP For some networks, particularly those with significant packet loss, this can provide dramatically improved efficiency as compared to TCP with its slow start exponential backoff behavior. So those are some of the things that we learned from our CDN presentations. We'll hear later about efforts to measure the performance of CDNs, and we've been talking both to CDN operators and to third-party data providers about the possibility of using widespread industry data to characterize CDN performance more broadly, something that the FCC might add to its measuring broadband activities. Okay. We also talked about a variety of research efforts that are underway on next generation internet research. The National Science Foundation has been funding a series of future internet architecture projects. In fact, I ducked out of a meeting of the NSF Future Internet Activities this afternoon to be here. That research looks at a variety of ideas. A popular one is something called information-centric networking, in which rather than packets being addressed to end hosts, you address a packet to a named piece of content, and routers or caches throughout the network store content, and the routing protocols route the request to the nearest instance of the content wherever it is. Because in many cases I don't really care who hosts the content, it's the content in particular that I want. This can be efficient when the same content is shared among a lot of people. There is also work being done on self-certifying identifiers that would reduce the security issues, IP address spoofing and the like, because you could verify that the host using an identifier was entitled to use that identifier, and also efforts to improve mobility as we go to more and more mobile endpoints. So we heard about some of these research ideas. Most of them are sort of probably 10 or more years off, so that's farther ahead in terms of research than this working group has been focused on. Some of the we were in an environment where the network neutrality rulings codify the notion that QoS is not something that should be provided by the typical broadband internet access service, and that's not consistent with a lot of research that is underway on improved ways of providing QoS. So at some point in the future there's going to be tension between what's going on in the research and development of new capabilities and what current policy is. I think that covers this slide.
Okay. As we have just heard, last year we were asked to consider whether we've gotten to the point where we should transition from a best effort internet to a quality of service enabled internet. And in the course of doing that, we informed ourselves to the nature and the scope of the Measuring Broadband America initiative. And it occurred to us as we looked at the landscape of what that did cover, and in this slide where you see the blue boxes with the little speedometer, those are where we've got those positioned today as part of the testing, that there were big swatches of the network that impacted quality of service that weren't currently being assessed by the current program. And we recommended that the Commission consider adding CDNs and various interconnection points to the MBA testing in order to get a better picture of the QoS that's occurring in the network. So we have considered a number of times this quarter about the additional data that would need to be collected to properly assess the QoS across the full landscape of the network. And as we did that, we wanted to make sure that we were only recommending what was actually necessary. We wanted to recommend that as much as possible, if arrangements could be made with third parties who are already studying this, that data could be used by the Commission. But above everything else, we wanted everything to be as automated as possible and generated by the infrastructure so that the manpower and the planning necessary to do this would be as minimal as possible. We also felt like it needed to be very open in how it was done and that the participation be voluntary. So there's almost no end-to-end measuring being done today, so whatever we recommend is going to be closing that gap. So when we look at this next slide, we looked at it in terms of what MBA did not measure during at the time. And while some of these specific metrics that are on the right-hand side of the page are part of the current MBA program, as they pertain to these areas in the candle on the left, is where we thought there could be some additional work done. For example, interconnection health, QoS and QoE, and CDN performance are the three italicized areas, and that's what we recommend to the Commission that they focus. So that brings us to a formal recommendation to expand the MBA program to add additional QoS and QoE measurements, expand the testing to include CDN performance, and to include a picture of the interconnection health in the network. And secondly, in regards to QoE, quality of experience by definition includes the degree of delight that the end user experiences with the service in question. And there's no way to really get to what that degree of delight is unless you're dealing with somehow the end user population and assessing that. So we wanted to recommend that the Commission closely follow the work that's being done in the ITU and the IETF on quality of experience. And as it pertains to how you get the data on the end user experience, we felt like the most optimal model would be for a public-private partnership to be established to survey end users on quality of experience. And that takes us to our module on in-home networks, and we're going to ask Lynn Merrill to take us through the next couple of slides on that.
So we had a pretty good working group, a really great working group as far as take us through this. Brian, Marvin, John, Russ, and Walter really helped in putting a lot of information together as we had developed throughout the summer. A lot of the activity this summer, I know that Russ has already talked about this. I'll just give just a couple more little brief items as far as for details. As far as the Consumer Technology Association, Brian Mark Walder's group, the device manufacturers are really interested as far as understanding and seeing what they can go ahead and receive from this. And one of the things is if they go ahead and get better performance, obviously they're going to have better sales as far as for their products. So I think that's going to be one of the main drivers as far as to help push them to have that interest as far as in the performance measurement. If we look at from the third-party data collectors, we had talked earlier as far as the groups that we've had. This was with our group and as well as with the sub-working groups. This really serves as a potential as far as to the FCC to be able to leverage the data as far as for the in-home networks as far as on the QoS and QoE. If you think of it from a content provider standpoint, they are clearly interested in being able to go ahead and receive this information anytime that they have an understanding as far as what data that's out there, and they can use that to go ahead and improve the experience by the customer. It's going to go ahead and drive usage. And then it also helps as far as if they need to go ahead and change CDNs and other things to be able to improve that. It gives them that information to move forward. From the Broadband Forum collaboration, we talked about TR-069 and 303. When we think of the uses as far as of these technical reports, They give us the enhancement as far as to, or they give the enhancement as far as to go ahead and do the collection as far as for the measurement tools. They also have some other things they're working on that I think we're going to be able to share as far as in the near future, as far as dealing with universal service platforms and uploads that can be done as far as with that. When we talk about service providers, either Comcast, AT&T, or Verizon, or other providers that are out there, these are the ones that had gone ahead and shown quite a bit of interest as far as where we were and where we were going. Anything that we can do to go ahead and reduce truck rolls and trouble tickets will greatly enhance their usage as far as for the network, and so from an in-home standpoint, that's a critical issue as far as for them. Addis, in our understanding as far as talking with these groups, that there is a growing interest as far as with them as far as to go ahead and focus on the in-home performance. And I know that Russ had brought this up earlier, but I just want to say it again, is, you know, from all of our discussions and everything, there's clearly an understanding that there's no individual standardized measurement that's out there that's available to go ahead and be used as far as in-home for people to see today, whether it's consumers, the providers, or the content owners. If we look at the impacts as far as the in-home, as far as on the networks, as far as for QoS, and obviously you have to include the QoS as far as in the home, QoS, QoE, as well as all the way back to the content in order for the customer to really feel like they have a good experience. You can look at the importance as far as due to the growth in the number of devices, but also you can go ahead and see as far as by each group as you think about their importance, the consumer devices and performance troubleshooting as well as the service providers, and then being able to look at remote management and troubleshooting. You know, identifying what's going on as far as in the home, as far as what's underperforming, as far as network-wise, and educating the customer. This all reduces the negative touches that a service provider is going to have as far as with that customer, and that increases the customer's awareness of a good product, as well as cuts the bottom line cost as far as to a service provider. If we think of it from the content owner and the app performance, or the consumer electronics performance, whatever they can understand and gain as far as from the details as far as that go on in the home, it's going to be a great win-win for them as far as being able to improve that performance. If we think of it from a policy as far as trending data or data usage, you know, that greatly is going to help the FCC and the industry to be able to understand the direction as far as where the market's heading, and then the needs, and then for the needs and concerns as far as to be able to take that forward. So after our summer's review, the sub-working group has gone ahead and developed some recommendations. And John and Russ, I'll turn it back over to you guys to go ahead and make those.
Thank you, Lynn. So the recommendation that we would make at this point is, because there's some issues relative to authority to go get certain types of data, we decided that the best path was for the FCC to issue a public notice on in-home networks and their contribution to overall quality of service or quality of experience. And when we looked at that, what would the public notice begin to cover? Well, it would solicit information to better characterize the current capabilities and evolution of the broadband home networks. It would identify stakeholders and potential third-party data sources on in-home networking performance. It would seek stakeholder perspective regarding initiatives to improve the knowledge of home networking and help establish performance goals. It would add information on the impact of network performance on end-to-end services and applications. It would seek out critical factors affecting in-home broadband performance. It would solicit suggestions for incorporation of third-party data sets into FCC reporting and identify potential issues derivative from using such data. It would solicit ideas and suggestions on trackable metrics that would best inform on the status and changing home environment. It would solicit suggestions to improve home networking environment, increasing its utility for both the consumer and service providers, content owners, and equipment providers. And finally, would seek to identify collaborative relationships and synergies that would contribute to quality of experience home networking goals. And so for the remainder of the year, our effort is going to be in two main areas. We're going to continue to work on finalizing the QoS and QoE metrics, and more importantly, we plan to spend the bulk of the time deep diving into the next-gen internet improvements and efficiencies. With that, we'll open the floor for questions.
And I don't see any tents coming up. Anyone on the phone lines? I think we will take that as a wrap. A lot of activities, a lot going on in this area, and hate to comment on this, but we have been running way ahead, and now we are exactly on time. So let me pass things to Greg and Lynn for the grand finale.
We understand there's a lot of excitement about this presentation because it's the last one.
The last presentation always has that characteristic.
That's for last. We understand the obligation and responsibility of therefore being brief, so we will proceed with that mutual understanding. This is the Spectrum and Receiver Performance Working Group. Greg Lappin to my right, and I co-chair the group. We, of course, thank our consistent and always helpful FCC liaisons from OET, and we have contributions and participants from a variety of varied interests, all doing something with RF. So since the June 9th TAC meeting, the last TAC meeting, we've had two basic areas of focus, one on enforcement and one on RF noise assessment, and we'll report on those in that order. On enforcement, we've been looking at the advantages of developing a database of enforcement activities, a database of activities at the FCC, as well as looking at the vulnerabilities of certain services like GPS and other RF signals. What we took away from the June 9th meeting was really on the RF noise assessment item, which is about defining and measuring the noise floor, and it was the subject of the technical inquiry that was released that the TAC approved on June 9th. And we've also had some discussion with professional so-called interference hunters, and those are people that make their living looking for noise problems and sources of noise and interference, and we'll talk about some of those discussions as well. So first we'll go to enforcement, and that's been a particular area of interest for Dale Hatfield on the other side of the room, and he will happily engage in discussion on the topic when we reach that point if there are some questions. But the conclusion of this work has basically been that a public record of enforcement activities would be very helpful to researching the topic and doing something about it. And we are here making the recommendation that the FCC should create a comprehensive and a unified, publicly available database of past enforcement activities. One of the outgrowths of this work is that we've looked at the threat to GPS and other critical RF systems from the viewpoint of spoofing and jamming. Dale spoke about that earlier. But certainly those kinds of malicious activities would be disastrous for a number of industries and potentially disastrous for the public. So with that kind of as a teaser, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Greg Lappin, and he'll provide some details about the interference hunters and moderate some discussion in the group if there are questions on this topic, and then we'll move to the RF noise assessment status report and the technical inquiry and next steps for the working group. Greg.
If I could just hit the pause button for one moment. The key to this is an actionable recommendation which you are making at this time as opposed to later in the year, which is great.
Thank you for reiterating what I inartfully did.
Many of our recommendations today have been draft recommendations, but this is a solid recommendation. Paul, of course, opened with one on the white paper which we approved, but this is an actionable recommendation that we can take as written right now. Yep, good. Thank you.
So, as a transition from enforcement to noise floor assessment, our group has held teleconferences with interference hunters. It's kind of like it's an ill-defined business. Anyone who wants to go out there and search for noise to aid a customer is an interference hunter. The profession is hired by businesses that are experiencing interference, such as cellular operators and public safety agencies. They're the pre-enforcement companies that often locate sources of interference and help to get it resolved without resorting to filing enforcement complaints with the FCC. They told us about types of interference that they've identified, which include all flavors of sources, such as microprocessor-based controllers, large conglomerations of switching power supplies, and intermodulation products from other communications services. We discussed with them that there really is no currently shared database. We like databases, so we want a database from them also of how they do their job. How do they locate noise, and how do they fix it? So we didn't meet a lot of excitement from them because I think this is their bread and butter, and they don't want to necessarily share all of their secrets. But we'd like to convince them that it would be helpful. That's pretty much the end of what we talk about with enforcement, so maybe we should have a little discussion now before we go on to our noise floor. Any?
Finish the whole thing, then we...
Yeah, I think go to the end.
Okay.
So we make sure we get through.
Sure. Well, there's always that.
Well, there is a relationship between, such a tight relationship between the two as well.
Okay. So as a transition that was our transition. In search of answers to the study of noise from the general public, we issued a technical inquiry that asked for detailed answers to the following broad questions. Is there a noise floor problem? Where do problems exist, both spectrally, spatially, and temporally? Is there quantitative evidence of harmful interference from noise? And how should a noise study be performed? ET docket 16-191 was posted on the FCC website on June 15th, right after our meeting, and accepted public responses until August 11th. And this is what it looked like. I think of this more as an artistic thing rather than text, but you can find this online if you want to see all the text of it. We received a lot of responses. At least to me it seemed like a lot. I know the FCC on some things receives even more responses, but to us this seemed like a lot. 73 different people or entities responded to us. On the ECS, which is the electronic comment filing system at the FCC website, there were 93 submissions. Some of those were duplicates. 7 direct submissions came to us by email, and those aren't on ECFS. The breakdown on responders, it's a rough breakdown with some overlap between groups. There were 23 companies or industry organizations, 39 RF professionals, 31 licensed radio amateurs, and there were 9 responders who didn't reply to the questions that we asked. The entities are here. You can look over the list, but the groups that were represented were amateur radio, broadcasters, cellular providers, public safety, GPS providers, power companies, and lighting producers. I was especially interested to see the comments from the lighting producers, since so many of the other responders singled them out as the industry which was the major source of noise. After reading both sides, questions were raised about whether the basic technology is a major noise source or if poorly designed and built products are at fault, and it could be possible to have have the efficiency advantages of modern lighting without the RF noise disadvantages. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. More things that we summarized from our responses. We didn't necessarily ask for answers to the problem. We didn't think anyone was going to really know the answers to the noise floor problem because we couldn't find answers ourselves. But rather, we asked for opinions on how we could get those answers. We received a broad sampling of opinions. 26 responders provided quantitative or semi-quantitative data. And by that, I mean quantitative data are measured with highly calibrated instruments and antennas. Not many people have those. The results from different sources can be compared with each other that way. Semi-quantitative data are measured with an uncalibrated device, such as an S-meter on a receiver. With all else being the same, these data can be compared with other data taken with the same setup to show noise trends over time. And we got some very interesting results from that. We received a broad sampling of opinions. Also, 8 responders wanted to tell us ways that we could study the subject, which was really what we were asking for. But almost all the responders gave their opinions on what they believed the major sources of noise were. Incidental and unintentional radiators were the most commonly cited noise sources. RF lighting and power lines were often mentioned. Switching power supplies were identified as problems as well. The affected frequencies interested us. They covered the gamut from medium frequency all the way up to UHF. The trend was, though, that the higher noise levels were at lower frequencies. However, there was evidence presented of increasing noise levels even up at UHF and higher. And we would like to find out, is this a trend? One thing that requires more study is the aggregation of noise sources. We had several indications that a noise source such as a lighting device that meets current noise standards becomes a serious noise problem when many such devices are used together, such as in a huge light board. We discussed other enforcement issues earlier, and many of our responders brought up another. Assuming potential noise-producing devices such as LED lighting and switching power supplies can be made to meet noise standards, many such devices are not being made that way and are being sold in this country. A recent European community study found that only 61% of such devices examined in a sampling met noise emission standards. It becomes an enforcement issue to locate and ban the sale of the other 39% of those devices. Then the question becomes, once the non-conforming devices are eliminated, do we still have a noise floor problem from the devices that are conforming devices? So what's next? One interesting thing that we noticed in our responses were omissions. No university researchers responded. No other government agencies responded. And there were no comments submitted from the satellite industry. So what we'd like to do to better advertise the technical inquiry to these communities and get their input from this point on. So we would like, and ECSF is set up to do so, we would like to extend the comment period for the docket from now until October 21st, which would give an additional 4 weeks for these people to submit comments. And we will make a concerted effort to contact some of them at least to try and get the word out. And finally, despite the extended comment period, we intend to complete a report describing the responses that will be presented at the December 7th TAC meeting. Several actionable recommendations based on those responses will be included in that report. We'd like to especially thank Bob Pavlak and Bauman Badapur, both from OET, for putting in a lot of work to compile the analysis of the responses that we've received to date. And we'd also like to invite anyone here who wants to look at the responses to log on to the ECFS, and it's very simple to do. You go to the main fcc.gov website /ECFS, or click on the thing that says ECFS, and where it says specify proceeding, enter 16-191 and do a search, and you'll come up with all of the responses that have come in to date. There are a few that won't be there, but most of them are. So I thank you for your attention, and we will entertain any questions.
Before we entertain questions, I would like to acknowledge and welcome Travis LeBlanc, who is the chief of the Enforcement Bureau, a very topical area for this particular presentation. And I would, in recognizing Travis and welcoming him, a good friend, the fact that we really are honored as a TAC with David Simpson and with Julie Knapp. Julie Knapp here, we're so blessed with Julie's presence so often, we don't recognize him as often, but having three chiefs of the major bureaus in the FCC present really is a great recognition of your work, but also want to express the appreciation for you being here. So, I'm looking for tent cards. Are there comments? Obviously, Travis, if you would like to make comments, you may feel free to do so. Dale Hatfield, I'm surprised your tent card has not leaped to the...
Well, let me say thank you to the working group. First and foremost, I found the presentation extremely insightful. I have had the pleasure over the years of having had Dale Hatfield bend my ear on quite a number of issues related to interference. I also want to thank Dennis for the invitation to participate as well. We clearly value the work and are looking at the recommendation that is being put forward. I completely see the value that having a database of the enforcement actions that we've taken available to researchers or the public or even the industry would be, and it's just a matter of trying to figure out number one, how to set it up, I think is a bit of a challenge, and number two, how to accommodate all the various interests and stakeholders that might want to see this database. So I'd be interested, to the extent Dale or others have more comments, in sort of understanding with maybe a little bit more particularity what the goals would be in terms of what you'd like to see in this database. I mean, we could literally, one version could be, okay, here's all the enforcement actions, and just put up all the actual actions that we took. But a lot of times when we're taking an enforcement action, we aren't writing documents for research. That's not our goal. And so, actually seeing the document may not give you any of the information that you actually were trying to divine from the document. Similarly, we do a lot of things verbally, not just in written format, and I actually think that's a good thing. Anytime you do something written, you start a full-on process that has to have some conclusion. Sometimes verbal is all it takes to resolve it. Indeed, sometimes the interference hunters are able to resolve it themselves as you present it. So I think it would be helpful just to understand not only, what the goal of the database is, I think I have a sense of that, but really what kind of information you're looking to have included in this type of database.
That's a very, very fair response. And Dale, I'm sure you're going to jump, so go ahead. Dale Hatfield.
Let me try to answer that a little bit, but gosh, I sure like to have contributions from other people who've been working on the area. But I think a lot of it comes down to root causes. In other words, what are you seeing in the Bureau, and what are interference hunters maybe on the outside seeing in terms of actual root causes, that this was an aggregate interference problem from lots of different noise sources that we haven't encountered before. This is a particular harmonic of some type of station that's causing information, because what we don't get now is really the root cause. And then with that, as a researcher, you kind of like to know what the trends are. Is some type of interference dropping off and some other kind interference? If I'm working for a company that's designing networks and I'm getting ready to move into a new spectrum band, what kind of interference can I expect to see in that band? What's trending up? What's trending down? So it goes back, I think, to root. Goes back to basically the root to the root cause issue. In other words, what caused it? And the nice thing about that, I don't think it necessarily has to give up any proprietary information or necessarily any information that you're worried about because you're thinking of some enforcement action. All it does is simply report, with, like I say, without any location or identification of carrier, here is a problem that we're seeing. I've given a lot of thought too is to how this can be a combined effort of the industry contributing these sort of things or confirming what you're seeing, or vice versa. They're seeing certain types of interference, people who are professionally, and then you say, yes, we're seeing that too. And that means then, from a research standpoint, we can pay attention to those and give more attention to those types of sources. Anybody else want to add from the committee?
So I'll try a little bit. So as this effort got underway, one of the things that I suggested to the group is that it's not enough just to say, well, the noise floor is going up. We've been having this conversation for 20 years. And so I said, well, it would be really helpful to understand what are the root causes and what do you do about it. And so we've been trying to collect information from different fronts, from people who are what we call the interference hunters. What is it you're seeing out there? What are the kinds of complaints that you get and you have to go out and deal? I think what the request relative to the Enforcement Bureau is, well, you've got folks out in the field and you're seeing all these issues that arise. How do we get better insight into the patterns that are emerging? So a couple of things just in reacting. I've been participating when I can in the group. It's always dangerous when the engineering office gives legal advice. I worry about the legal office giving engineering advice. But I'm not sure we need to extend the comment deadline. What I think would be helpful, because you can still put filings into the record, is reaching out to some of the players here, whether directly, because we just issue another public notice saying, hey, we may wind up in the same place. So in other words, if there are universities or players out there that we think would be useful to hear from, just reaching out to them. I think also talking to some of the folks directly, like NEMA, about lighting and getting a better understanding for what the trade-offs are. I mean, when I first started hearing about this, I said, gee, it's very important for our country to ensure energy efficiency. If we're solving interference by putting aluminum foil over the lamps, that's not going to help. So, getting a handle on this, because in the end, whether the recommendation comes out that the commission should begin a notice of inquiry and gather, it would be really useful to have surgical information about, well, what are the things that are important to target. I liken it to, my car isn't running, the engine's not good. Well, change the tires and see if that helps. We really need to, I think, out of this process, be trying to figure out, well, okay, what are the root causes? Is it, let's just reduce the Part 15 emissions limits, but maybe that's not the problem. Maybe there are things that just aren't covered, and maybe there are things that can be done, frankly, by working more closely with the players, the industry, in gaining a better understanding and support to voluntarily move to better compliance. So just a few thoughts. I think the work here has been tremendous. The most progress I think we've made in years.
Travis, one thing I'd like to add is one of the things we're weighing and that Julie alluded to is, do we need to change the Part 15 limits, or are there bad actors out there? As far as, in this case, lights, or it could be power supplies or whatever. So if we had some idea of what the Enforcement Bureau is seeing out there, are you seeing a rash of illegally imported devices, or devices that say that they meet FCC standards but don't, or not? That would be the starting point to going out to do tests to find out, do we need to change the limits, or are we okay?
One comment, one goal that I'm hearing is to have this information on root causes available for research, but another one that I'm hearing is on policy. That is, that it may help inform the policy process as well. And we certainly do run requests, when we receive them from OET and others about, can you let us know of any investigations of this particular issue? And we're able to produce something. We already have a database that tracks our general enforcement activities from it's probably better to think of it as a managerial or just a process standpoint, so that we know where it is in its process, as opposed to a substantive standpoint. But I certainly take your point, and not just in the interference context, actually, would say it in everything that we do as a general matter, where we're taking enforcement, we're spotting problems where we may need to change the rules, or where someone's skirting around them. So I completely agree with you about the value of the potential value of this data for the policy process.
Okay, thank you.
I guess Pierre was first.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah, just to underline what you're saying, Travis, I think that the database is important for the public interest. Researchers are just part of the public. And I think that what is particularly important is it's a way for the public to get a sense of what are the trends, what are the hot spots, what are the changes. To use the $10 words, what's the synoptic view? Because you already have a number of data sources available. There's information on public safety reports. There's lists of enforcement. There's lists of problems with amateurs. But it's hard to get a sense overall of how important are those compared to everything else, and over time, how have things changed?
I think the FCC could get some interest and attention here, because I think as more devices are connected, you're going to have more and more interference. And I think, Dog the Bounty Hunter could become Dog the Interference Hunter. I think it's a great new reality show that people, would get the word out and could be very exciting.
What is that?
And it's a public-private partnership funding.
I think that's probably a good grand finale. Well done, Russ. No, it
would make the FCC sexy again.
Yeah.
Again. We can stop it there.
Sitting next to Julie, my goodness. All right. No, this has been a very good session. I will have to laugh a bit with this. I was leaning over to Michael about an hour ago, commenting on how much early we were, how we were running over and had lots of time and we have the last two presentations have successfully brought us to our normal position of being 5 minutes over, so congratulations to the last two teams. No, and I say that jokingly, but seriously, the very, very good material and rich dialogue in the last, both sessions. So do appreciate that, and appreciate across the board. Thank you all of the chairs. Thank you for the sub-working group chairs. We seem to be extending and reaching out, and with our outreach through through the process that Greg has described, we're reaching an ever larger number of people who are making contributions. So do want to thank each one, thank the TAC members in general and all the subject matter experts we've been able to draft into the process. Special thanks, as always, to the liaisons who really are the glue that keeps this all together, and do greatly appreciate it, and the large amount of work that is accomplished by the liaisons. So terrific, one and all. Let me turn things to Michael. Any words that you have, words of wisdom that you want to share to close us out?
Well, I try to get a tie from Walter, so at least I look like a tie at a far distance, but didn't manage to get a copy from him, a tie from him. But other than that, I think the meeting went great. I think there was a great participation, and getting all the slides in at the right time was always helpful. Look forward to seeing everyone on the December meeting as well.
Yeah, I just underscore Dennis's thank you to all of you. And one thing I think that's been a little bit different about this TAC is we've had in the working group so many other parties that are contributing. It's even a much larger group than we see here. I don't know what we're up to, but it's probably 90 or so.
No. Much
more
than
bigger
that.
than that.
Yeah.
So anyway, and I want to thank Dennis for all his work and the volunteer hours that he puts in on this. You don't see all of the things that he does to make this run, but it takes a lot of time and effort, and so I want to thank you. And whether maybe close out with a round of applause. So the next meeting is December
7th. And remember, this is, for all intents and purposes, an all-day meeting by our collective agreement, 10 to 4. So we will hopefully, for that time, be able to close exactly at 4 instead of 5 past. But I'm not putting any wagers on that.
There'll be a break.
There will be a break. Yeah, there will be a break. 5-minute restroom break. That's it. No, we will have a break. We will have food there. But certainly as we come to the conclusion, looking forward to the next meeting and the conclusion, we will be looking for lots more actionable recommendations, but at the same time, as I say, lots more. The goal is to also refine those down. Remember, our process and our goal this time around is not to simply come out with 40 actionable recommendations, which we successfully did last year, but to refine those down into a prioritized list that we can present to the chairman rather closely after the session. And in fact, what we're attempting to do is to not only have the actionable recommendations for this year, but for those actionable recommendations that have not yet been consummated, that we would bring the complete list of where we stand with the top 10 actionable recommendations that are still outstanding for the TAC. And I will, in advance, tell the chairs I will be looking for you to help us to manage those so that you have the top actionable recommendations out of each of your working groups, and then we'll have the arm wrestling between the chairs and with help from some of the liaisons to sort out the top of the top. So that we can present those and hopefully get the focus, the laser focus on those, and that will be a very good outcome to this year's activities. So with that, I want to thank you again, one and all, for all of your efforts. It's been a tremendous amount of work on some really exciting topics. As I think about what's important in our world of communications, we're touching virtually everything that is important through the efforts that you're putting forward. So that's really, really a wonderful statement. Thank you, and have good travel back to your respective dwellings. Take care, all.
Thank you.
And Dennis, thank you for letting us join online.
Nice job.
Thank you very much.